Hello, everyone, and welcome back to hockeyprospect.com YouTube's channel and our podcast scouting session. We are back. Yes, the NHL draft is coming soon, and we're back from our, well, I wouldn't say a vacation because we did wrote a book, but we're back from our little podcast vacation. Hey, Brad, how's it going?
It's going well. Stanley Cup final, finally get to appreciate it a bit. Finally get to sit back and actually watch. It's a good final. I must say, It's been a good final. Brad Marchand is absolutely unbelievable. Let's put that way. That's one of the best pickups at the trade deadline I've ever seen. Like, legitimately, I think they're going to win it because of him.
Yeah, they did not pay that much for what he's bringing to that team. Like, his play in the final has been pretty incredible. But we're not here to talk about Brad Marchand. We're here to talk about NHL, future NHL goaltenders. So today's episode will be all about goaltenders, as Brad, mostly, and I will talk about a ton of goalie this year for this draft. I think we're going to have about 20 goalies that we're going to discuss. So just before we get going, I just want to remind you guys. So I just mentioned we did wrote a book with our staff at hockeyprospect.com. So if you want to buy our book, just visit hockeyprospect.com. So it's very similar to the last few years guide, the black book. The black book does not exist anymore. We've changed a few things in the book. So we this year it's called the NHL Draft Breakdown. So the profiles are a bit shorter, but the rest is pretty the same. You get our analysis on all the players, all the goalies. You get NHL scout quotes that are always very popular. You get our own quotes, and then you get our profiles, our grading system. So pretty similar to what we offer with the Black Book in the past years. Just the profiles are a bit shorter. Also, the pricing is also way down. It's a 50% off drop price, I guess. So it's only $19.99, and in the past year was like over $40. So I think it's a great value if you want to know if you want to learn anything about the NHL draft. We got you covered with that book. Our rankings are out. You can check them out on hockeyprospect.com. If you're members, you have access to the full list. If you're not, the top 32 is there for free. So if you want to learn and impress your friends about your prospect knowledge, your draft knowledge, I think that this book is a must-have for any of you. So let's get started, Brad, with our goalie podcast. Before talking about this year's goalie, we're going to talk about last year's goalie class. A year later, Brad, maybe your thoughts on what we had last year as our ranking goes. If you have any change you would make, or any thoughts on last year's class, and then we'll compare a bit to this year's class, how we viewing this overall.
For sure. So there was a couple of things that we went against the grain on. For starters, we thought the CHL goalies were overrated. To a degree, I still think that's correct, but Carter George was better than I expected. I still don't think he's actually a top 5 goalie in a redraft right now. I know for some of you that might sound low, but he is Canada's starter. He was phenomenal to U20s, and he is a good goalie prospect for sure. That said, like right now, the top 3 for me are Marcus Gidloff, Ilya Nabokov, and Mikhail Yegorov. And so we had Mikhail Yegorov 1, and we moved him back to 3. We had Gidloff 2, we moved him back to 4. We had Nabokov 4, we moved him back to 6. So we went in the wrong direction, and that's on me. So the reason I want to talk about the previous class was I made a mistake that's very basic, but it can happen when you're in crunch time and there's just so much to do. And I got hit with recency bias. I started watching the Russians later in the season, Kirill Zarubin, Timofey Vintsov. Now, I'd seen them to start the year, but I really heavily went into them at the end of the season because of the playoffs. With Moisevic, for instance, he went very deep, so I watched a ton of them. And with Ivankovic, he was a very unique goalie, so I kept focusing back on him. And Zarubin, nobody had him, so I kept going back to him to make sure I thought I was at least right. The good news for me is I still think he's top 5. I do think he's a better goalie prospect than Carter George still, for instance. But he, I would say, probably is 4 right now in a redraft is today. And if Vincent falls out of that top 5 entirely, he didn't get an opportunity to play. And one of the reasons why is a goalie that we're going to be discussing in depth this draft, which is in Krasnaya's system and Andreyanov. So, I'm proud of some of the things we did last season, getting Zarubin on the map, getting a Vincent on the map. Nobody had them. They were both drafted. We were right on Marcus Gidlov. We were right on Yegorov. We fell out of Nabokov, and it was my bad, but we had time for him, a ton of time for him. So the order is incorrect. I'm calling myself out. So what I did this season to try to compensate for that and learn from that is to make sure to give myself enough breathing room so that for these rankings, I could continuously go back at the end. There's no recency biases. I'm watching everybody, and I'm still I'm feeling very comfortable. And so I was disappointed in myself last season, to be honest with you. I thought I let us down, Jérôme. I thought we had an opportunity to really scare some people in this industry with the list. It was still good, but I think we can do way better. And I hope this list is the start of that.
Yeah, I'm looking at the list here, and how would you we're going to talk about the 2025 goalie list here. How would you maybe compare not last year's list, but last year's class to this year? Like, how do you feel more, I don't want to say confident, but more excited about this year's class compared to last year, or you still prefer last year's class to this year?
So I thought the last 2 years specifically were really high end, and I thought last year's was underrated. I knew some scouts privately who had no time for that class. I thought they were incorrect, and a lot of them didn't. It's one of those situations. Very few people in the entire industry know most of the goalies, right? Because they're all over the world. So unless you really hone in on them, it's very hard to get a real read on it. Okay, so 2023, 2024, they were exceptional classes. This class, I think, falls a bit under that, but at the same time, it's still a really good class, and it's a deep class. And I'm sure I'm wrong about some of these kids, especially in the back half, where I'm sure in a redraft, they're going to be moving up, and some that I have in the high end will move back a bit. So overall, I think this will be at least an average class. Statistically speaking, you're looking at 4 to 5 potential goalies that are going to play in the NHL full-time out of this class, and that's pretty solid.
Yeah, I'm pretty excited about some of the, at least the top 3 goalies that we have this year. I like those 3. I feel like there's a somewhat of a drop after those 3, but we'll talk about that later on. So if we start with this year's class, we'll start with maybe the goalie that did not make our list, Brad. Let's start in the queue. Samuel Meloche of the Rwanda Husky. Maybe, like, I know him a bit, watching him in the queue, watching him with Team Quebec a few years ago at the Canada games. Maybe your thoughts on Meloche's game and how he performed this year. How much, to me, it's my little concern with him was about consistency from game to game. So maybe I'll let you maybe quickly talk about him, and then we'll go through those guys a bit faster than the actual guys that we have ranked, but we'll give those guys their due and talk about them a bit here.
Sure. So byproduct of Rwanda, very prototypical in terms of size, 6'2.5", 6'3". We love the fluidity of him when it comes to his lower half, and he has a very similar style to Columbus's second round pick Gardner there the previous season, because like Gardner, he looks to transfer with that paddle down and fluidly move and laterally adjust his positioning. So it makes it very difficult for teams to beat him down low, especially off the initial shot. The problem is, it speaks to what you said, Jérôme, about the consistency, that one of the major issues with Meloche's game is the rebound control. The read his initial release point reads, they're fine, but they're not better than fine. They're not high end. They're not exceptional. And I think it's one of those situations where he's a very athletically gifted goalie when it comes to his transfer rates. And I think he's gotten away with that over the course of his career up to this point. And now he, for the first time, is having to make real adjustments due to the release points of some of these high-end shooters in the queue. And he's given up too many rebounds. And now he is very good at getting back out in front of the secondary shot. However, the biggest issue with him is his hip line. He doesn't have the same type of mechanical dexterity that you'll see in a player like Frolov or goalie like Frolov. So what it means is that when he is transferring on one plane, the initial transfer, he has to stay on it. He can't immediately adapt or adjust that transfer as he's laterally rotating. So it means that he can be very susceptible to certain types of rebounds because he can't get square back or get re-squared up to the puck. So that's one of the major issues. The other huge issue for Meloche's game is that he's very rigid within his hands. So his blocker glove and shoulder girdle, there's a lack of dexterity within some of his movements, and that is put him under. He's also susceptible to slot shots at a higher rate than a lot of other goalies on this list. That said, good size, fluid, natural athlete, good kicking reflexes, again, takes the bottom part of the net away better than a lot of these other goalies. I think his blocking style makes a lot of sense for how he tries to play the game because he is trying to contextually mold his game around his deficiencies. His shoulder girdle is one of the biggest deficiencies. So if you have a paddle down style, you're trying not to rely so much on having to use it. So I think it's one of those situations where there is potential. It's just, as you mentioned, inconsistencies.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like I think you'll agree with me. Like he's one of those goalies that the more we watch, the less we like. Because I like the first few games that I remember that I watched, I was like, oh, okay, he looks really good. He's a good athlete, and the games that I watched, the first few, he faced a lot of shots, and he looked like an NHL goalie in that. But the more you watch, you can start seeing some of the weaker part of his game. That's why we watch a lot of games to see the players at their best, but also at their worst, and trying to figure out what can translate and what can not translate. So he's an interesting guy. I think he's going to get drafted, but there's some work to do here with that player. If we move to our second player, we're going to go to Russia with Lev Khashin, like a goalie with great size, 6'5", 194 pound. Brad, maybe your thoughts on him?
Sure. So you're not going to hear this name outside of the site out. So he wasn't on Central's list. He's an overager. So he's out of Medvedev's system, which is not a very good team. They just made the playoffs, and largely it was because of his season. He started the season slow. He wasn't very good in the first 6-7 starts, but after that, he was much better. So 6'5", 200 pounds, like very athletic in some areas. So one of the best glove hands in the entire class. Like that is one of the major takeaways. He's a southpaw, so having such an elite glove and him being southpaw means that he's kind of unorthodox in terms of how shooters have to try to read off of him and see what's available on him. Very, very, very dexterous in terms of how he can laterally translate and transfer. Very good extension rates. He can do full splits. He can get very low to the ice. That's where he's like much better than Elijah Neuenschwander, Michal Pradel. There's two examples. That's where he beats them out. But he's also very raw in some areas. He's a bit behind when it comes to the technical mechanics. He's more of like an instinctual Russian goalie, which is what you see a lot over there. That said, I think that there's an interesting base to mold. I do think that it's very likely he's a backup if he does play, which is obviously why he's an honorable mention and didn't make our ranking. But he's one that look out on draft day. He might be one where I think teams do know about him. And he did improve this season. And like last year, he was very raw, like way too raw. He's swimming. And don't get me wrong, he swim occasionally, but it's one of those situations where I think the technique improved enough where he does look like you could mold him one day into something for a team.
Yeah. Moving on to we're going back to the queue. Lucas Beckman from Bécamo. That's a goalie you and I have talked a lot about in our conversations this year because he kind of like he was a good goalie in the queue. Like he had a really good season on the, I would say not a top team, but not a bad team either. But he was like he played a lot for that team, and he did well. But some goalies, sometimes we like this kid is ranked number 2 by Central Scouting. He didn't make our top 13, so just I guess it's a different point of view. He's one of those kids that sometimes it's just not just goalies, but also it can be a defenseman, forwards. They're a really good junior player, but we don't see their game translating at the NHL level. This kid is not a big goalie. His athletic ability or probably I would say average at best, but I could even say below average. So he's a difficult one because there's some hype with that goalie because of Central Scouting and their ranking. But at the end of the day, he's just not a guy that we I guess we could really believe in him to translate his game to the NHL. Maybe we're going to be wrong, but it was just not going to happen. I feel like we almost tried to convince ourselves at some point during the year about him. Say, oh, he's playing well, it's going to work out. But if we go back to what we believe for goalies, it was just not going to work out for us. So either we look really bad on that one, or we look really good. So Brad, I'll give you your 2 or 5 minutes here to explain a bit your thoughts on Beckman.
Yeah, so the big thing with Beckman is he's had a tremendous season, and that makes things difficult because he really has been that consistent. He was incredible in the playoffs. He played exceptionally against Moncton. It's one of those goalies that makes me very uncomfortable because when I watch him, basically every third shot I think is going to go in the net because he's not very good at sealing himself while he's laterally transferring, and then he still makes saves. So it's those situations where I keep thinking the puck's going to go past him and he makes the save anyways. It reminds me a little bit of Vieni Vivalainen, which for our audience here is I believe it's a 6th round pick out of Columbus back in I think 2019. And he was a goalie who I thought was athletically just under, but read the game well. And he didn't make it, but he came close. Like he was dominant in Liga, came over to the AHL, and was a bit under. He couldn't translate his game to the NHL. And that's kind of where we're at with Beckman. The huge difference, I think, in opinion for us relative to some people who have him a lot higher is the athletic base that Jérôme mentioned. So when you look at his hip line, he is very rigid within his hip line and his hip dexterity relative to his size. Typically, when you see that at this age, it's a massive correlation between not being able to translate and having that quality. If he was 6'3", 6'4", you're talking Elijah Neuenschwander then type of situation. Is a bit different, and I would grade him a bit higher. But he does have good reflexes. Like his kicking reflexes are actually like pretty solid. It's just when you take everything together and you look at his dexterity through his frame and you look at everything as just a one whole cohesive unit that's moving, it can fall under. Like for instance, when he's transferring into an RVH position, then he has to go back into a standing post integrated position. The time it takes him to actually do that can really get him behind the play. There's a lagging phase there. Now, obviously, he's going to improve. He's young. He can absolutely find another level of coordination. And that's where I'm a bit worried. But you can't change a hip girdle, and we'll discuss that in more depth here in a bit with Neuenschwander. But it's one of those situations where we just think he's just a bit too limited for the NHL. But in terms of the mental consistency, the poise, his ability to read the game, his ability to keep his team in games has been phenomenal. So the way I look at it is mentally, he's a starter in some respects, but then physically he falls under in too many aspects of the game for us to feel comfortable.
Yeah. He's one of those goalies, like I might mention this about the 12th time in this podcast, but he should be one of those goalies that looks to go play U.S. college. Just, maybe he can play an extra year in the queue, maybe 2, but I think playing U.S. college would be a really good option for him. But I'll repeat this pretty often in this podcast because it's a new reality for CHL goalies, and hopefully they take full advantage of it. Next guy is Petteri Rimpinen from Finland, who, for those who have watched the U20 in Ottawa, he was a star for Finland. So he's not ranked by us. He's a bit similar to Beckman in the sense that maybe the size slash athletic ability is not at the level, a good enough level for us to rank him or to be confident he's going to be a NHL goalie, because he's already a pretty good goalie in the Liga. So Brad, maybe a few words on Rimpinen.
Yeah, so I watched him last season, Mestis, and I loved him, but I thought he was just under. The extension rate for his size, the skating ability for his size was just under for me. And then obviously he forced our hand this season. He was so good at the U20s, and then he was actually better in the Liga in the first half of the season than the second. And I actually looked deeper into that and tried to deep dive his game and figure out why that was. And one of the main reasons was his team had better shot suppression rates in high danger areas in the first half relative to the second. Now, what that meant was that he was dealing with different types of plays, such as tic-tac-toe plays around his net area, low to high plays that forced his small area game. And that's the trick to beating this player. It's actually very difficult to beat him when he can see the puck, when he's already set. He has a very, very high-end read and react to the game. Like his release point reads are phenomenal. He understands when a player is trying to adjust his handling and try to fool him with the shot placement. He's very good at understanding angular adjustments on wrist shots and lateral drag. So he has that in spades. So the way that you beat this goalie is by making sure that he has to be overly reliant on his skating, which for his size is a bit under. And now, if this was his initial draft season, I think we would actually have this goalie ranked. But because it's already his +1 and there's more limited growth rate potential, we think it's going to fall just under. That said, he was spectacular this season. There's no denying what he did. Without him, I don't think Kiekko makes the playoffs at all. Like, he was the reason they made the playoffs. He forced them to Game 7, and some of his performances there were really good. And admittedly, sometimes I watch him and his lateral transfer rates hold, and I think I'm like, okay, well, if the smaller skating game comes up another notch, and he can improve his rate of recovery, because that's the huge thing here. When you're a goalie who's 6 feet tall, you have to weight the rate of recovery exceptionally high, and his falls a bit under because of what we suggested with the extension rates, the small area skating. It's not all there at the level that's necessary. So goalies like Jack Ivankovic, for instance, who's very similar size to him, well, Jack Ivankovic has better micro adjustment rates, better rate of recovery, and he needs those things in order to translate. He's a better skating base at the same age. He's more explosive naturally. So those are the qualities that you really need. I'm sure some of you watched Justin Wolf this year, who finished top 3, I believe, in the Calder race. So he's a perfect example of what I'm talking about, right? The reason Wolf is so successful is the skating ability and the ability to recover once he misreads an initial play, which is what we're referring to when we discuss micro adjustment rates for the most part. So it's one of those situations where he falls under that slightly, and that's why he's off our list. But I won't be shocked at all if he ends up getting drafted late. I won't be shocked if a team takes him late thinking that they can get him another rate to his physical development that might be able to get him to hold.
Yeah, I think just with his performance at the U20, that's going to help him getting drafted more. I think that's going to play a big factor in getting drafted. Even though he's not a huge goalie at 6 feet, there's not many of those getting drafted. But we saw last few years. Nabokov was one last year that got drafted at he's only 6 feet. So we'll see. Next guy is Daniel Salonen, we stay in Finland, plays in the Luko Junior. No issue with his size. He's a 6'3", 175-pound goalie. He's still playing junior goalie. He's I believe, a third-year eligible or second-year eligible. Anyway, it's his 19 years old season. Brad?
So he's a +1. Yeah, he's single overager. I actually thought he was double to start the year too for some reason, but he's single overager. One of those situations where he's a late bloomer goalie. He didn't even play well at all last year, really. Like, one of the worst save percentages in U20 SARU, which is not a high level of junior competition. So you expect a goalie who's actually matters to dominate relatively early there, and he didn't. That said, the athleticism was always there. He just didn't know how to read the game well enough. There was too much reacting and not enough reading, not enough poise, not calculated enough, didn't understand how to keep his head on a swivel, scan the ice, understand how to recognize backdoor entries. He didn't know how to contextually play against different play types on the ice, developing 2-on-1s, 3-on-2s, etc. This season, however, well, oh man, did he ever take off. He seemed to understand how to hone his athleticism and use it as a weapon against the opposing team instead of on himself. And then he actually managed to play in Mestis, which really mattered to me. I was really hoping he would play in Liga as well. That would have really, really helped my cause here. But in Mestis, take this for what it's worth, which is that I really thought he was better than Emil Vinny. Now, the sample's smaller, and it's his +1, right? So he was older than Vinny and smaller sample. However, I really thought he held. And I mean, Emil Vinny has his faults. We had him as an HM last season for a reason, not a draft. We always thought he was a bit under, but he's still very athletically gifted, and there's some talent there, which is why he was drafted by Edmonton. So it's one of those situations where I really thought Daniel Salonen forced my hand. I didn't expect to have to rank him, but he was very good. He's athletic. He's very competitive. He has a very high battle level, which is one thing I really like about him. He has a good glove hand. One aspect that really needs to improve, though, is we talked about the size, 6'3", 175 pounds, but he'll drop too early. He's a bit too reactive in tight. So there's times where he'll break down when it comes to needing a hold on his skates. He'll enter butterfly too early and then make himself too small, and then he's susceptible. So that needs to go up to another notch. But he already showed vast improvements in that area when you look at his development curve from his initial draft season to this one. So I'm pretty impressed with his curve. He's heading in the right direction. I'll be honest though, I doubt he gets selected. I didn't want to make him an HM though, because he's a goalie for next year that I'm going to have to track depending on how he does in Liga. And believe me, if he does well in Liga, which is possible, if he does well there, then teams will know about him. He'll be on the map, and we'll be discussing him next year for sure.
Yeah, if people want to check his numbers this year. 25 games, 23-1, 1.55 goals against average, 933 save percentage, 9-2 in the playoff, 202 goals against average, 911 save percentage. So to say he was a dominant goalie in that league would be an understatement.
And what do you have, Jérôme, in the previous season? It was like a 67 save percentage flat, right? Something like that. It was really low.
In 23-24, he had 3.06 goals against average and 868 save percentage. So,
right, so look at the difference. That's pretty amazing from a one-year trajectory.
Yeah. All right, up to the next one. We go to the WHL. Ondrej Stebetak from the Portland Winterhawks, goalie from Czechia, who did really well at the Olympia tournament in this past August, then went to the WHL. Didn't post like fantastic number with Portland, but he did show some good stuff. And had a good playoff run also with Portland. Unfortunately for Team Czechia at the U18, they couldn't get him because of his second round win. So, and it shows Czechia was a bit in trouble at the U18 with no Stebetak. But he's an interesting goalie. Brad, maybe a few words on him, because he was like, he did move around our list a lot this year. So he was a bit of a tough one to project and to rank.
Yeah, he's difficult to gauge in some respects. So the thing I'll start by saying is, this is a kid who came from the U17 Czechia hockey last season and then playing full-time in the dub. That is a ridiculous jump. That's like the equivalent of Newhook going from the BCHL to college and playing in the top 6. It really is an enormous jump in terms of development to what's expected. But he held relatively well, which is, it's a testament to the kid's consistency, and it's a testament to his skill set. So this goalie for me, he's tricky, and that's why he was moved all over rankings. In one hand, I feel like he's more than the sum of his parts. If you look at him from his upper half to his lower, you look at his reflexes, you look at his reads, you look at his battle level, his technical ability from his butterfly to his overlap to his RVH to his VH, so you name the technique, whatever it is, his T push-offs, a C cut, small area skating, all of it grades around average to good. Nothing exceptional. There's no standout exceptional quality to this player. With maybe you could argue when he's dialed in, he's extraordinarily consistent within the skill set he has, but that he's more than the sum of his parts. There's a mental component here that makes him more than the sum of his parts. He's just better than he should be. The other factor is the growth rate. He's 6'2", but he looks like an extremely skinny goalie. I don't think he's filled out whatsoever. So it's all about if he can become a more explosive goalie so that his lateral transfer rates improve. And there's some critical areas around in terms of like his overlap positioning and using his C cuts, then integrating to an RVH, then being able to go post to post, swing correctly, and get back out in front of the play when players wrap around his net area. That was an area of difficulty for him from the very start. And there were times where he was still susceptible right to the end of the season, even though there was minute improvements depending on the performance and month. So, you know, the other thing I'll say is like for a goalie who's coming from U17 Czechia, like you're not used to traffic at all. You're going to the dub where Jerome, you know, like the dub is like a bit of an old school throwback. You get people in front of the net all day, huge kids in front of the net. He wasn't used to that at all. I thought he did a very good job of reading the puck through traffic. His puck tracking through traffic was actually pretty darn good considering how unadapted he was coming over. So he's one for me where, and as you mentioned, the playoffs, like, wow, was he amazing in the playoffs. He really performed extremely well in the playoffs. Like he performed way better than Ivankovic, for instance, did in the playoffs. So it's one of those situations where I feel he's just under, but I still like him. So it makes it difficult to rank him, but we kept him just on the outside. And honestly, he might be one that in a redraft down the road, we might look wrong on. But for us, a bit under athletically, a little too rigid, not a very good athlete. And again, more than the sum of his parts. And usually when goalies are more than the sum of their parts, like Lucas Beckman falls in that category as well, usually they get a bit under. They typically don't have enough for the NHL. The NHL is it's just unbelievably difficult to be a full-time starter or split starter in the NHL. As all of you know, it's all freak. It's so many freak athletes. It's just all freaks in nature. So that's where Stebetak falls a bit short.
All right. We got two more goalies to go in our not rank list or honorable mention. We're going to start in Sweden, but it's not a Swedish goalie. It's a Latvian goalie, Regnars Capars. Brad, not a goalie that is really well known, but that's the goalie who faced the most shot of any goalies this year. Tell our audience a bit about Tell our audience a bit about him.
Absolutely. So he plays in the Dingo Viking system in J18. J18 for our listeners is it's not nearly as good as the J20 level. The J20 level is primarily where you see all the prospects come out of, and J18 is the systems just before that. So it's one of those situations where, let's say structurally, there isn't a lot of, like it's really under. Let's put it mildly. Some of these, like it's funny. I hear NHL scouts always discussing teams like Saginaw not having structure. It's very obvious when some scouts don't get an opportunity to see leagues like J18 because Saginaw would look like the most structured team ever compared to some of the systems there. So my point in saying this is that his defense didn't exist, and it was him versus the world. On average, he faced 68 shot attempts a game. On average.
Can you repeat that, Brad? I just want to make sure everyone understands how many shots he faced per game.
Yeah, 68. Yeah, 68. I know. I when I first read it, I was like, "There's no way that's possible," right? And then you watch his defense in front of him, you're like, "Oh, this is possible, and it's happening, and it's going to keep happening." So it's one of those situations where he did slow down as the season progressed, and I mean, of course he did. It doesn't matter how conditioned you are, what size you are, or what type of freak factor you have, you're going to slow down at 68 shot attempts per game. So he was blown up against some of the top teams, admittedly, like against Djurgården in J18. Djurgården has, so for everybody listening, Djurgården is basically the equivalent of the program over in Sweden. They got always the top end talent coming in year after year. Look out for them for the next 2 to 3 years. We'll be talking a lot about Djurgården and some of the players coming through there. Obviously, that's where Frondell and Eklund are from. So, he was blown up against those teams. However, the only reason that his very poor team was even able to stay in any games was because of him. He was extraordinarily consistent in a lot of his performances. He's lightning quick, very good reflexes. His processing rates are very unique. So again, I'm going to bring up Emil Vinny here. So one thing about Emil Vinny that I found very strange was that even though he had a very high octane processor, and what that meant was he would constantly looking to pre-scan and scan over and over and over and get back out in front of plays, he would do it to a fault where it actually work against him. And it was one of those situations where I think it's for some players, they're trying to control, not ADHD, but try to control their base instincts so that they don't overstep their positioning. And with Capars, that's what I was finding. I was finding that he was just constantly quick twitching his neck to try to scan and look what's around him. And now normally I would fault him for that. Like Emil Vinny, I faulted him. It's just too much. But with this kid, because of his situation, he had to look for backdoor entries at all times. There was, you see, again, he had no defense. So it was one of those situations where I wonder what would happen if you put him into a system. What would he look like in your garden system, for instance, even at the J18 level? He wouldn't have to do it nearly as much. And would that change some of his outcomes, because then he's not overly constantly trying to process what's happening? So that was food for thought for me throughout the season, trying to figure out what to do with him. I'll admit, I did not love him when he was playing in Latvian international hockey. I did think he looked a bit under there. One of his major issues is that he needs to absolutely fix his set stance. He is way too short in his set stance. It reminds me actually of Ilya Nabokov, who we were talking about earlier, Jerome, where Nabokov, it took him years coming out of the MHL to pull everything back and up and try to look bigger in the net and to make sure he had the proper posture at the position, because like Nabokov, Capars is not that big. A bit taller, but not by much, but he's way too short in his set stance. He's looking like he's crouching really low to the ice, and it looks like he's giving up way too much room in the net. And that really matters for him, because like Ondrej Stebetak is an example of this, the hip girdle, the shoulder girdle is not very dexterous. He's not very good at being able to elevate his shoulders on in-tight shots or be able to show a dexterous shoulder line, which really can matter depending on the shot type. And so for him, it's going to be extremely important going forward to get taller in the net, and that's going to take some time and modifications. But his smaller skating game is very good at transferring on low to high danger shots in tight to him from the crease and slot area. And there's a lot to like. I think he does get drafted. I do. Now, it's going to be late, but I do think he gets drafted where some of these other kids might not. Like Daniel Salonen probably doesn't, but I think Regnars Capars might.
All right. Now let's talk about a goalie that actually was at the Combine. There was not many goalies at the Combines this year. A lot of them, surprisingly, that they were not there. But Elia Neuenschwander from Switzerland, I'll learn to say his last name better. Because his younger brother apparently is a stud in Switzerland. So this is a goalie. He's a late birthday, good size. He also played for the Swiss national team, the U20 team during the World Junior in Ottawa. Brad, he's our last goalie that we didn't rank. So let's talk about him, because he was actually at the Combine, which makes pretty much guaranteed that he's going to get drafted. So let's talk about him.
Absolutely. So he played in Goalie junior hockey in the Swiss Junior League. The interesting aspect to him is he played in the SL, which is like the equivalent of the AHL over in Switzerland. So he has professional experience already in Europe, where a lot of these kids didn't. So that gives you it gives you a different look and an important look. So it's the equivalent of me getting an opportunity to see Daniel Salonen and Mestis, for instance, which, again, those games really matter. You have to weight them more heavily because it's an opportunity to see what he looks like in more structure. Now, with Neuenschwander, I'll give him this. I thought he actually looked at his best in some of those performances. However, at the U20s, one thing I predicted correctly was that his smaller skating game would let him down and get him behind the play too often, and that was the case. So the good is that he's 6'3", and he presents very well. I like his set stance a lot. And he's one of those goalies who's very reflexive. So in both his upper and lower half, he's got the glove, the blocker, the legs, they're all in unison. Everything is very reflexive. He has very good kicking reflexes. And I like how big he looks in the net in an RVH position. However, I bring up the RVH because he overutilizes it, which is very similar to Marcus Gidloff. That's exactly what Marcus Gidloff did the previous season. And it was a result of the fact that his smaller skating game hadn't caught up to the rest of his abilities yet. And so what happens is with some of these goalies that lack the smaller skating, they end up trying to integrate into their post and RVH too often to compensate. That is absolutely the case here with Neuenschwander's game. So that's one of the big issues with that I have for him. Another is the lateral tracking. So depending on the passing trajectory and speed, his lateral tracking would die down. But he does have good T-push-offs. He does have a much better large area skating game than he does a small area skating game. So he could still get back out in front of those and look pretty good on most of those shot attempts. However, this is the biggest issue. This is where we really have a discrepancy with this goalie relative to probably some NHL teams and central scouting. And that has to do with the hip girdle. So it's something I said I would bring up earlier. So the aspect of the hip girdle that's important is that like you can't really change the angle that you kick out because your hip girdle is your hip girdle. You can't change the position. You can get more dexterous within it, absolutely, but it's not all hip girdles are created equal. Tell me how many times you said that or heard that outside of a goalie podcast, but it's one of those situations where it really limits him. And it's not like he's 6'6" or 6'7", so you don't give him as much benefit of the doubt with you would with some of these other goalies like Marcus Gidloff when it comes to growth rate, right? So it's one of those situations where I think one of the most underrated aspects of the sport right now, an attribute that's underrated, is understanding the angular trajectory of a hip line and what the hip girdle indicates within that hip line. And believe me, I've tracked goalies over 12, 14 years to see what happens within their adjustments out of their hip girdle over time. And guess what? Most of them have the exact same kickouts that they did when they were 18, when they're 30. And it's because you can't change it. So my issue with Neuenschwander, it's way under. So what happens is if he misassesses the initial read and he has to make a micro adjustment using his hip line and then try to kick off at a different angle, he can't do that very well. And I don't think it's something that's going to actually be able to be corrected to get him to the NHL level. And I'll admit it's a shame because the base is very good. And I understand why some NHL teams would be interested. I understand why he was brought to the combine. The base is there to mold. It's just all about how a scout looks at the hip girdle, looks at the hip line, looks at the extension rates, looks at the rate of recovery, looks at the smaller skating, and then makes that assessment. And for us, he's a bit under, but he's an interesting goalie for sure.
All right. That will do it for the list of the goalies that didn't make our list. So now we're gonna start with our top 13 ranked goalies. So let's start with Gabriel D'Aigle from Victoriaville of the Q. We mentioned the Latvian goalie who faced a lot of shots. Well, in the Q or the CHL, no one faced more shots than Gabriel D'Aigle. I would argue there's no real stats about this that I'm aware, but no one faced more grade A scoring chance than Gabriel D'Aigle because his defense was awful in front of him. One of the worst defense that I've seen in the Q in a long time. I could go way back to the 2002-2003 Rimouski Oceanic, when they trade every single good player on their team just to tank their season to draft some guy named Sidney Crosby. So, yeah, it was not pretty for D'Aigle. But he has again, he's one of those goalies that I think should go the U.S. college route. It would be good for him. This was a goalie that was hype. Like I don't remember the last Q goalies that was hyped like this when he was 15 years old. Like he was the second overall pick in the Q draft. There were articles about him in like the biggest newspaper in the province of Quebec, comparing him as like the next Marc-Andre Fleury. He's from Sorel, like Marc-Andre Fleury, so there was a relation there. They do train in the off season together. So, but this has not been really. Not just this year, but it's not like it's his third year in the Q, and that's not been very smooth. Let's put it this way. First 2 years, he was a backup. This year was it was his year to shine, but he just did not have any much help around him. His defense didn't give him a good chance, really. But as Brad will probably mention this, he was better in the second half of the season. Start to find a bit more consistency, but still it was a tough season for him. But there's still some tools here that maybe if everything goes right, maybe that end up being NHL goalie. But a lot of things will have to go right with that goalie. He's going to be back in the queue next year, but after that, I would like to see him transfer to a college south of the border. Brad, I'll let you give you the mic. Maybe your thoughts on Gabriel D'Aigle this year. Before you go, I'll say maybe like you'll talk about it, but I think mostly the biggest issue for him is his mental game. When things go really bad for him and he's not feeling it, like it's really hard. So that's something he's gonna have to work with in the next few years. Not get too down on himself, because like we saw it with Victoriaville, we saw it with Team Canada at the U17, U18. When things go wrong, they go bad for him. It can get really ugly at times. So, but the tools we like some of the tools, but he's got some work to do. So, Brad, I'll let you start with your take on Gabriel D'Aigle.
Sure. So he reminds me of a Quebec version of Vadim Zarenko, who was like a hyper athletically gifted goalie who was pretty raw, but had some base instincts to work around and had fantastic reflexes and extension rates. And that's really the base of Gabriel D'Aigle. 6'4", 200 pounds, prototypical in terms of like what you're looking for in size. One thing that's fascinating about this goalie, so he used to put videos up of him when he was younger in the position. At the position. And I went back and watched some of those videos to see if there was any overlap to what he looks like now. And one of the main things that stood out to me is that when you're talking about transitional butterflies, we're talking about a goalie collapsing into their butterfly, then exploding back out into a set position or a relaxed position back out of the butterfly. So in this draft, for instance, Michal Pradel is one of the best, if not the best in this entire class at that. Joshua Ravensbergen, Semyon Frolov, these are exceptional transitional butterfly goalies at that size, 6'3", 6'4", 6'5". With D'Aigle, he's falling under that. And it's because his posterior chain is not statically holding him as he pulls back up out of his butterfly position. What's fascinating is that's been the case his entire life. So we've seen videos of this player when he was like 7, 8, 9 years old, and he was still having the exact same difficulty because every time he transitions back out of his butterfly, he's way over the top of himself. What matters about that is that when he's off balance, it doesn't give him proper access to his edge work. It doesn't give him proper access to his head rotation. It keeps him off a plane, so he doesn't track as well. And that's what we've seen this season. And it's something that never let up. And so it's one of those like physical limitations that I wonder if he can even correct for it to the degree that we would need to see from him. However, what's interesting is that I feel like they're, again, goalies that know what they are, they compensate for the deficiencies. He knows that there is a problem with his balancing when it comes to his transitional butterfly. So one way that he's accommodated for that is within his RVH positioning and how he tracks lateral high danger shots in tight to his net area. So he'll stay in his RVH and then he'll explode. That's one thing about this kid. His explosiveness off his posts are very good. That's where he compensates with that transitional butterfly times and allows him with that full extension, those reflexes to get back out in front of the play and make some massive high danger saves in tight to him. You mentioned the consistency rates mentally. Like I couldn't agree more. That said, my favorite performance, which I discussed in the Black Book a bit here, is that he let in 3 goals in the first 7 shots and he stopped the next 35, right? So he has the ability to still rein himself in and get back to that starting quality mentality that you're looking for, even when he's flatlined early. occasionally. So that's very important. The other aspect I'll say is that he's not naturally the most gifted reader of the play and seeing unfolding play types, understanding where the end point of a play is going to occur. He's more of a reactionary goalie, and that happens with massive athletically gifted goalies, which he is one. So it's about finding a balancing act between staying poised, staying on his skates, understanding the dynamics of when a backdoor entry is actually materializing, and then making sure he doesn't collapse too early or put himself out of position where he has to rely on those full extensions, because that's really his situation right now. He's way too reliant on his full extensions, and you typically see that with goalies who are a bit under in terms of tracking and reading the play. And so it makes a lot of sense with what he is. I do think he has the potential to be a backup, though. I do. Like, there is a lot there. He's extremely competitive. He is athletically gifted. He's massive. And I thought he did have a very good season in the second half out of Victoriaville. And you mentioned Jerome, one of the worst defenses we have ever watched. Like, legitimately just could not defend to save their lives. So without him, it would have been way worse. Like, he was the reason they won some games. So I thought he had a pretty good season. I do wish he was younger. He is one of the oldest goalies for this class, and that means less growth rate potential. And then you factor in the posterior chain and the issues there, and the stagnation within that aspect of his growth rate. And that has us a bit scared, and that's why he's a bit lower on our list.
Yeah, so he's ranked 13. And we're going to move on to Mans Goos, who's ranked number 12 out of Sweden. Not a huge goalie, 6'5", 190 pound. I remember watching him at the start of the year. I was not really impressed. I felt like he was one of those big goalie that was just getting hit by the puck. I didn't see. I was like, I don't see a lot of compete. I didn't see a lot of mobility, agility in his crease. But that was really early in the year, and me personally, I did not go back and watch him. I think the only time I've watched him was maybe when he played. I think he was like the backup with the national team behind what's the name of the other Swedish goalie? Arenstam? Yeah. Lovi Arenstam. So he was often the backup to him. So I didn't get a really good read, but a good read on him in the second half of the season. But I know, Brad, you watch him a lot more than me, so I'll give you the mic here. Your thoughts on him and his potential.
For sure. Well, I'll start by saying all-time name, like one of the best names I've ever heard. Mans Goos, that's his real name. So, to Jerome's point, like you look at him at the start of the season, he's big, but he's pretty rigid, and it doesn't have the best extension rates relative to some of these other large goalies, like Gabriel D'Aigle is an example of that. D'Aigle has better extension rates. He falls more in the line of Neuenschwander's extensions, but I would argue has a slightly better hip line, better hip dexterity. That said, the major thing with this player, for 6'5", 200 pounds, you typically want to see him stylistically and mentally have the characteristics of a blocking style goalie. And for the most part, he does have that. So when we're talking blocking style goalies, it means that they don't collapse too early. Their crease containment's better. They're composed. They typically don't get beat on the first shot due to their play. It's more of play happening around them, right? There's a consistency. What happened was in the second half, we thought, well, not second half, more in the middle area, we thought that went up. Middle portion of the season, that started to go up a notch. And we really started thinking that he had some potential, but then it died down as the season progressed. So there was a bit of a back and forth there in terms of his mental consistency rates with that aspect of blocking style goaltending. The other factor, though, is very good at laterally sealing himself as he has to dynamically move through screens with redirect shots. So what happens, like, for instance, with Pavel Moiseivich's initial draft season, one of the reasons he was overlooked, I think, is because he wasn't very good at actually staying sealed as he was transferring. Where with Mans Goos and a lot of these other goalies now, I will give them full credit. Like, we've been, behind the scenes, goaltending development, goaltending scouts, coaches. One thing that's been discussed, and I've been discussing this publicly a lot, is that there's too much technique that's thrown into these goalies at too young an age, and it takes away base instincts. And I'm going to discuss that more in depth when we get to the Russian goalies. But I will say this: they are much more technically proficient now than ever before at understanding how to seal dynamically through screens. And Goos is a perfect example of that. And that's one of the hallmarks of his game. It's one of the best aspects of his game. And when he is sealing correctly and he's moving, he is massive. So it's very easy for him to stay back in front of the initial shot, even if it's chaotic rebound situation or off of a redirect or a screen attempt where he has to deal with some sort of broken play where it hits a shin, ankle, etc., stick, whatever. So that's the baseline. There is issues though. Like for instance, like I don't dislike his hands, but he has some difficulty when it comes to the consistency with his high glove. Gabriel D'Aigle also falls into that. We didn't discuss that, but that's one thing we could say generally for this draft. Is that most of these goalies actually have some difficulty with their glove hand. Not all, and we'll break down the ones that are very good with them. But D'Aigle and Goos, for larger goalies, glove high, there's a susceptibility. It needs to be fixed for sure. He also has the susceptibility when it comes to sealing his glove over his pad when he's extending. So that's where there's some room for improvement. Mental consistency overall needs improvement. And for being such a bigger kid, his small area skating game certainly needs to improve. However, the lateral transfer rates are actually not bad at all. So for me, him and D'Aigle fall right in the same category, which is why they're so similar on our list. I do believe he gets drafted. I just think he's a long shot though. Like he's one where I'll be a bit surprised if he makes it. But when you're talking late 6th, 7th round type of situation, I would consider him.
All right, we just mentioned D'Aigle, who's 6'4", Mans Goos, who's 6'5". So why not? Let's go with a bigger goalie next, with Louis-Antoine Denault from the Quebec Rampart, who is 6'8". Hopefully he's done growing, but he's 6'8". Yeah, quite the story. We talked about D'Aigle, who was the 2nd overall pick in his Q draft year. This kid was never drafted. So you might be wondering, why does a 6 foot, I mean, at the time he's probably 6'4", 6'5". I don't know. Like, why? How does a guy like that goes undrafted? Well, he didn't play in the typical path for a young, hockey player in Quebec. He played more in the prep school route in Quebec, which is not a very common, path for hockey player in the province of Quebec. Usually they will play in that prep school league, but usually they'll move back to midget AAA at 15 or 16. But this kid stayed there. He's from Quebec City, if I'm not mistaken. So he's playing in his own town, and they invited him to their training camp. And I think their goalie coach was really like, I got something here with this kid. So they signed him. He played mostly as a backup last year. He was actually, first half of the season, he was the backup. His partner was Quentin Miller, who was a Montreal draft pick. Miller got traded to Rimouski, and then Denault took over. And then this year was his, true first full season as a number one goalie. I mean, the 6'8" package is very interesting. There's not many guys like him in the NHL. As soon as me and Brad did talk about him, we talk about Ivan Fedotov. And Fedotov skating is a bit of the issue for him, and we thought the same about Denault, but he did make some progress over the course of the season. He's a hard worker. And then he finished really strong in the playoff against Moncton, where Moncton was the best team in the queue, and he did pretty well. So if you ask me in October, it's like, is this kid getting drafted? I'd probably say no. But you have to give credit to the kid. He improved, and I think he's going to get drafted. Even though there's not many 6'8" goalie out there. He's probably going to be more of a pick between round 5 and 7. I would say at this point. But he's a nice project. Again, one more year in the queue, and then after that, I think he could go play U.S. college. That would be a great path for him. So Interesting package out of the queue for that goalie. We're not used to have that many queue goalies in our podcast show. Usually, the last few years has been very thin out of the queue, and there's another queue goalie we're going to talk about soon. So maybe Brad, your thoughts on Louis-Antoine Denault.
Okay, so first thing I'll say is he's massive, as Jerome just said, but so he's the biggest goalie we have ranked since Taylan Boyko. Taylan Boyko was a 4th-round pick out of the Rangers system, which I found fascinating. So different than Shesterkin and Georgiev and some of the other smaller goalies that they've been developing recently. But Boyko was a very unique dark horse wild card goalie it was the COVID draft 2021. So a lot of limited data going into that draft with him. I don't know how he's progressed. I haven't had an opportunity to see him this season. That said, when you look at Ivan Fedotov, he's the gold standard right now for trying to understand what could translate within his 6'7.5", 6'8" goalie, because before him, really the last really high-end goalie, and I'm not saying Fedotov is one, but this goalie was, which is Ben Bishop. Ben Bishop was 6'7", and unfortunately his career became much more limited, just as he was, I thought, peaking as a goaltender. And the reason why is because of the amount of torque that is required to play the position on the hip line. So like when the goalies are collapsing and having to deal with post integration, their RVH, and having to get back up out of that and transitional butterflies and et cetera, like the hip line gets destroyed, right? The knees get destroyed. Everything gets broken early. And so one of the, I'm a fan of Denault. I was a fan of Boyko, but one of the sad aspects of a goalie being that large is that they typically need a ton of time. So you're looking at 6-7 years out before they can play for you. And then you get a 4 to 5 window where they operate at the capacity they can, and then their body breaks down. And so that's one of the massive factors with Denault for me, is that I really like him, but there's a limitation here with just how many years are going to get out of him if he makes it. And with Fedotov, as Jerome mentioned, he was really one of the litmus tests, because the athletic components of Fedotov when he was younger were very good, especially with his kicking reflexes, and just his coordination and his size is very impressive. However, came over a bit too late, not his own fault, as a lot of you know. Unfortunately, he had no choice but to enter the military in Russia, and they kind of used him politically. And so that put him behind. And then his small area skating, which I thought would be exploited in the NHL, has been really exploited in the NHL. So there was a size cutoff at this position. Everybody talks about what you want, 6'3", 6'4", that's your prototype. That's typically what you want. But the truth is, it's not really any such thing as the ideal size in net. It's really contextually based off of the athletic components and the toolkit of the goalie. For instance, if Dustin Wolf was 6'3", if he had the exact same qualities, yes, you would take that. However, in reality, if he was actually 6'3", there's a very limited chance that he'd be able to have the same level of coordination within his frame, and his skating mechanics and ability would go down a notch. So he wouldn't be as quick, right? So it's all about the context of the player and how the player plays the position at the height they're at. So with this goalie specifically, we had to really factor in that small area skating game. And what that means is we want to see how he anticipates play in advance. And that's where he's a bit under. For such a big goalie, he's a raw freak athlete with a tremendous amount of dexterity in his shoulder line. We've been talking about shoulder lines a lot on this podcast up to this point. He has a phenomenal shoulder line for how big he is, legitimately incredible. He's a freak. This kid's a freak in nature, very reflexive. And, he can take over games. He's honestly extremely impressive in some viewings. But the small area skating, it did improve. However, is it enough to suggest that he can actually hold long term as a potential starter? We thought he was just under, which is why he falls into our 11 slot here. That said, I'm going to be kicking myself if he finds another level of development. Which this thing is getting so tricky, Jerome. We looked at Marcus Gidloff, right, and we had him number 3. We loved him. Even as high as 2, put him back to, what was it, 4? Yeah, 4, Jerome, right? We had him 4. This is the thing. One of the reasons that we dropped him slightly was because he's one of the oldest players in the draft. But you have to factor in his potential to fill out his frame on top of his size plus the age. we were actually a bit under. Like his growth rate has been spectacular, and right now in a redraft, I think he's the top goalie. I really do. I think NHL teams, for the most part, got him very wrong. To be honest, the Islanders have themselves a huge steal. So it's one of those situations where with Denault, are we making the same mistake? And these are the types of questions I've had to ask myself, and the type of conversations Jérôme and myself have had to try to figure out what to do. But the case by case basis here is that there is no Ivan Fedotovs that have translated yet. And so until we see one, unless this goalie blew our minds, we're going to wait and see an example of this in the industry, right? It's one of those situations where real scouting requires actual percentages. You have to take in percentages into account. You have to take probability into account. You actually have to. You can't just put LJ Mooney up to 18th on a list because you like him, right? Like that's just not how it works. You have to factor in what actually translates and what we've seen before, and then use comparison models. And that's why Denault is just a bit under. But freak athlete. I'm very intrigued by his career going forward. I'm going to be watching a lot of him, and he's one of these bigger kids where I think he might at least be able to be a backup.
Yeah, he's an interesting one. Also, he came out of nowhere, a year ago. So there was nobody knew who he was. Basically, gets to Quebec, and then he started playing well and getting more playing time. And then even this year, the more the season progressed and how he played against Moncton.
He was so good against Moncton. Huh?
Yeah.
He was really good against Moncton.
Yeah.
I haven't forgotten that. It still scares me. I'm a little worried that we have him too low. We'll see.
Yeah. So very interesting to see how, what happens at the draft. I think it's going to be important to see which team actually drafts him. See what because they're going to have to be patient with that goalie. It's, like you said, it's going to be like a 5, 6, 7 year project here. So yeah. So let's move on to the next guy, and we stay in the queue with Alexis Cournoyer from Cape Breton. Again, he's our number 1 ranked goalie from the queue. I think a lot of people are going to be shocked by this. We're taking a bit of a chance here because as far as viewings, he only played half of a season in the queue, but he was straight up dominant. He had a great second half. If you want to check his numbers are really impressive. Great story. This guy was cut by Beckman last year. So a year ago, he was not okay. Let me repeat this. He's 19 years old. He only first started playing in the queue this year full time after the Christmas break. And last year he was at the Beckman camp. He was cut and released. And I just saw an article about him, and he said, when I got cut by Beckman, my goal was just to play Junior A in the Maritimes, and he did, and then get a scholarship to play youth sports and have fun. That was his goal. And then a year later, he could get drafted into the NHL. He just committed to play college hockey at Cornell. It should be next year. He said he's going next year, unless he gets drafted by an NHL team and they think he should play an extra year in the queue. But we'll see. But it's quite a story. He played for one of my good friends, Vincent Dumont, in the Quebec Collegial League. So if you play in the Quebec Collegial League, you're not supposed to get drafted in the NHL. Nobody plays in that league end up getting drafted. And it's the same thing for the Maritime Junior A Hockey League. So it's quite a remarkable story. Good size, 6'3", 6'4". He's a good athlete. Confident is one word I was told by one of his former coach. Confident, but in a good way. I like his the path that he has. He's going to Cornell in the ECAC, so I think it's a good fit for him. And we're going to talk about what we saw in the second half of the season. He was, if you look at all the goalies in the queue, he's probably the most dominant goalie in the second half of the season. Although, we wish we saw more games. That's the risk I think we're taking at this point with him. But there's a lot to like here. People will ask why is he ranked your number one goalie out of the queue, and then Lucas Beckman had a fantastic year, and he's not ranked. So we feel like there's more tools that can translate to the NHL than Beckman, and we feel even though Beckman is 2 years younger, even with give him 2 more years of development, we don't think he's going to get to a level where Cournoyer is, as far as athletic ability with his size. We don't think he's going to get there. So that's a bit why Cournoyer is there. But we are aware that I don't know how many people have this ranking of cute goalies like we do, but we'll see in a few years how this one looks. But Brad, I'll let you talk about Cournoyer, but he's a goalie that really came in late for us. And then when we start watching more and more, we're like, hey, this goalie is good. So he's really interesting. No clue NHL draft wise what's going to happen for him. Like, I think I'm more confident Denault gets drafted than him, just because of the lack of viewings. But maybe there's a goalie coach out there for an NHL team who feels the same way as we feel, and will push for him as a late pick in the draft. But interesting guy, Brad.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it came, as you said, it came out of nowhere, right? Like, just unbelievable how he just came onto Cape Breton and forced our hand, which is what you want, right? When you're looking at a goalie and you haven't seen him, and admittedly, this is a goalie it took a bit of time for us to get to because he wasn't even in the queue for half the season there. And the last thing I want is to have to deal with another goalie. Okay, they take way longer than players. I'm watching full game after full game, and if he forced our hand, I had to keep watching, and the more I watched, the more I liked. So one defining quality of this goalie is that took 8-game sample. It took 8 games for him to get the one full split save. That is a good indicator that he has a lot of hockey sense. We talked about Gabriel D'Aigle, where he's extending all the time and he's constantly trying to put himself in positions where he has to do split saves and laterally adjust. And Cournoyer doesn't have to do that because he reads the play better. He's more calculated, he's more poised, he's more systematic. That said, he's a bit strange in the same way that Aleksei Medvedev is a bit strange, and we'll get to that down the list here. But in the sense that he plays too deep in his net, regardless of the fact he's actually pretty poised and calculated. So, typically when it comes to depth management, the better a player reads the play, the better their depth is. And that's the case with Andreyanov. But with Medvedev, he's not a dumb hockey goalie, and neither is Cournoyer, but they play too deep inherently. And part of that, I think, is a maturity factor. Right? So for Medvedev's case, he was in the OHL. This is his first full season in the O. And so I think there was a bit of inconsistency there, and he tried to improve it over the season. With Cournoyer, it seems like a default mode. Now, when you see a default mode for a smart goalie who's not contextualizing his depth relative to the play, not reading back, like always thinking a backdoor entry point is present even though it's not, and not giving himself enough opportunity to stay on top of his crease with his size, so he can cut down angles at the rate that you want to see in terms of the efficiency of it, it usually is a result of having previous validation by being able to play the position as deep as he has. And that speaks to what Jerome was talking about from where he came from. He was playing in lesser leagues where he could get away with depth mismanagement. He didn't need to manage his depth like he ever did until he got to the queue. That was the first time he's ever had to try to figure out how to cut down on angles successfully, because, to quite frank, the shooters he was facing before couldn't handle his 6'4" frame, and he's smart, and his release point reads are very good, and his glove hand is exceptional. So it was one of those situations where he could get away with it. Now he can't. So our ranking is completely dependent on him overcoming that deficit in the next 3 to 4 years of his growth? Can he learn to cut down angles at a higher degree? Can he learn to be more aggressive at the right times? Does he understand how to read and then react and then contextually manage his depth relative to the actual play that's unfolding? That's going to be the defining qualities of this goalie long term for us. If he can do that, then I think we're right in our assessment of having him as the top ranked goalie, even though he's older, because there's a whole lot to like. Like he's very technically gifted when it comes to staying sealed. He can do full splits, even though he's more of a blocking style goalie. Instinctually, he's very good within his crease containment. Very rarely over commits on plays. He's very poised. When shooters are coming in tight on him for a 6'4" goalie, he's very good at staying on his skates and not overly committing to his butterfly position too early or collapsing when he doesn't have to. And again, I'm going to emphasize the glove because this class, as I mentioned earlier, not great when it comes to the glove. His glove is spectacular. He had some of the best glove hand saves I saw out of any goalie this season. And he's pretty competitive in his own right as well. So I wish the sample was bigger, of course. And I kind of wish we didn't have to do this because it's not a great look, to be honest with you, to have the overager Q goalie as the top ranked kid. But we had no choice. He just performed way too well and has everything that you're looking for. He's good size, great base instincts, and I think he's one of those situations like Daniel Salonen where he was a late bloomer. It just took him some time, and now he's arrived.
Yeah. I mean, that's the definition of a late bloomer, my friend.
Yeah, absolutely.
19 years old season. So really interesting. Really interesting to see what happens with him at the draft. Speaking of, late bloomer, but the total opposite of a late bloomer, Jack Ivankovic, who has been, well known for many years already. Is our next ranked goalie. People might be shocked by the fact that he's ranked number 9 here by us. Smaller goalie. Did not have a good season, I think, in the OHL. I don't think he was. I mean, he had a few stretch where he was good, but overall, I didn't like his season. People will talk about the U18, but there was no real competition at the U18. It was not a good tournament, so we don't really value the U18 that much in our evaluation. Same thing goes with the Elinka in August. We don't really value the Elinka that much. So Brad, we might take some heat for that one, but we're not too crazy about Ivankovic as a NHL goalie. I mean, the simple way to say it is like if you want to play in the NHL at that size, you need to be pretty much perfect, and we think he's far from perfect. So I'll let you talk a bit about Ivankovic here.
Sure. So I'll start off by saying maybe something we should have started with originally, Jérôme, which is like, for all of you listening, one thing I want to make sure everybody knows is that we don't do this for attention, right? Like we're not here to put on a suit and then take to Twitter and get validated and get likes and pretend we're scouts. It's not what we do. We don't try to make a list look a certain way to get reactions. We're not reactionary in that sense. Okay. A lot of other people like to do that stuff and we'll let them have at it. We're actual scouts. So what I mean by that is like, we watch what we say we watch, and believe me, we'll go over that. Jérôme and me will go over that when we break down the top 32 in more depth. But when I say we watch a lot, I legitimately have watched over 30 games of every goalie on this list. It takes an entire year and it's brutal. It is not fun. Okay. And I say that because like the last thing I want to do is have a kid way lower than what's the expectation of him within media. Okay. So when I open the black book, what I read quote wise is new to you, all of you, when you read it, as it is to me outside of my own quotes, obviously. So one thing I was looking for when I looked at Ivankovic's profile is, do NHL scouts agree with me on this player, or am I really living on my own island? And I was very satisfied to see that a lot of quotes really, not only do they agree with my assessment, but they went after, which is the root problem here. And that's general media scouts or media personalities at the NHL level that honestly, they don't really understand this position. And they just hype up prospects that are from Team Canada. Ivankovic is a byproduct of Team Canada. And it's one of those situations that is not so different and reminds me a tremendous amount of Zach Vakali. Zach Vakali was a goalie I had no time for. I was going to live or die on my hill with that goalie assessment. If I was wrong, it would have set me back years. I was lucky enough to be right about Vakali, and that's how I'm feeling about Ivankovic. So I'll start there. The other thing I'll say is that, and we should mention this for every kid on this list. Like, I feel Jérôme, both of us, we've had more parents coming out of the woodworks here than any other time I've seen for drafting. Right, a lot of parents are getting involved. They're looking at social media. They're looking at the things we say about their kids. Okay, for the Ivankovics, everything I'm about to say is not to criticize your kid and put them down. It's to constructively criticize, try to help some of these kids get a better understanding of their games and to try to showcase the direction they can go in, okay? And I'm not perfect at this. I'm far from it. I make some massive mistakes, but I also have some hits on my side too. So this is the thing about Ivankovic, is that I really think he's just a byproduct of what was supposed to be this next level, kind of like what Pyotr Andreyanov ended up for us, Jérôme, which is like this incredibly consistent, dominant Dustin Wolf type of goalie, right? And I read some of that where it's like, oh no, his technique's perfect. He's the smartest goalie in the draft, and he's basically Dustin Wolf all over again. I've read that a lot. And again, this goes back to media because that's a storyline. And that's what, unfortunately, a lot of scouting, it's not real publicly. I think one way we try to separate what we do relative to other people in this industry is we're not here to waste your time. And I know for some of you, that's, you're probably thankful to hear that. But the truth is, a lot of people out there don't care about your time. They don't mind wasting it as long as you read their work. They just want your attention. And so with that said, so Ivankovic, first of all, he's a true 5'11" goalie right now. Yes, his parents are bigger. I know his dad is a lot taller than he is, so you're hoping for some growth rate there, and that would really go a long way to helping his career. But at 5'11", this is the general scouting rule. This applies to every position. It's something Jérôme and myself have always factored in every step of the way, and it's one of the best things I can ever tell all of you publicly. And that's when you're dealing with the player, and in this case, a goalie with the least margin of error in his game, it means that you cannot make excuses for his performance. Okay, so when you look at his performances, the best performances he had were in the international sweater. So Team Canada, Hlinka, he was very good. U20 performance, he was good. And then obviously the U18s, he was very good. There's a huge issue. The Hlinka and the U20s and the U18s are all nowhere near the level they used to be. Until this Russia-Belarus nonsense ban gets lifted, international hockey is half of what it used to be. And so we have to weight it very differently. That means we have to weight it very differently with Ivankovic as well. So I have to take in consideration his regular season performances and his playoff performances much more heavily than I would otherwise. So that's the first thing I'll say. And when you take into his regular season, yes, you can argue Brampton wasn't very good defensively at times, and they were sporadic. And I do think that this was the first time in Ivankovic's career that he looked mentally like he was an unconfident goalie at times. You could see it in him. So I try to take that in consideration. But when you do that, he still falls well under. Okay, so there's a lot of components here. The first I'll say is that I don't like his set stance. With a small goalie, I understand what their goalie development coaches were attempting to do. What you want to do is you want to try to get him to present bigger than he is because he's 5'11". However, their set stance for him was so wide. And again, when you're very wide, you drop into your butterfly is going to be is equally wide. So again, he's taking up more net. However, he's a brilliant skater. His skating foundation is his base. They made him so wide that it took away access to his edges at times. Okay, that's problem one. Two is his hand positioning. If you look at his blocker and glove, when we're talking about Petteri Rimpinen, goalie we're about to talk about, Michael McIvor, when you're looking at their glove positioning, okay, for shorter goalies, they're more narrow, so they have access to their edges, and they keep their glove in a high supinated position so that they can catch gloves that go up, catch pucks that go up above their glove, right? So now Ivankovic has excellent dexterity within his hands. His hands are very active, and I feel that they've done a very good job with them. So I understand why they're trying to allow him to relax more, keep them lower, and then explode upward. But I think it's to a fault. And then you look at how wide the set stance is. Again, I think it's really to a fault. So from a modification aspect, he's going to have to really augment and really, I think, rein in and narrow his stance as he continues to develop in order for him to to actually become something. So for me, I had to struggle because I really just, it's like Samuel Meloche, Jerome. That was another goal I know. We both had difficulty with the set stance. He can look smaller in net, shrink, doesn't look exactly like he should present. And that can be a really difficult thing to overcome because the goalie just quote unquote doesn't look right. That said, he can modify aspects of that and get back on track. So let's talk about aspects that are way harder to modify and areas where he absolutely falls way under Dustin Wolf, Devin Levi, UC Saros, Alex Nedeljkovic, etc. Okay. And that's his ability to understand when a shot fake is going to turn into a lateral setup against him. Okay. So Dustin Wolf is phenomenal at staying poised and on his skates so that he can laterally explode across the net. But it wouldn't work for him if he was baited prematurely into collapsing into his butterfly off a shot fake. This is where Ivankovic has absolutely struggled the entire season. This was an area of concern from game one, and it never stopped right up through the round of the playoffs against Oshawa. So that is an enormous concern because he's not 6'2" or 6'3". Okay, so when he's laterally transferring and he's late, he's at a massive disadvantage, especially if his arm position with his glove is not up higher so he can try to take back the top part of the net away. It was an enormous concern right through all of the season, okay? So that's one of the major issues that's very difficult to correct. The other is that his butterfly his 5-hole was very susceptible. Now, I know a lot of you are saying to yourselves, well, wait, he's 5'11". His transitional butterfly shouldn't be really fast for him to go down into the ice and enter his butterfly and cover the lower part of the net away and take away a 5-hole. And theoretically, you'd be right. However, that wasn't the case at all. He was actually overly reactive within his butterfly. He would sometimes collapse in it too early in tight plays and then reopen the butterfly as the puck was actually going through it. And that happened right throughout the season. So the problem is when you're a gifted athlete, which Ivankovic absolutely is, his rate of recovery is phenomenal. His micro adjustments are good. He's fast twitch. He's explosive. He has all those things. Okay. He's a very good athlete. I'm not going to take that away from the kid. However, there's a balancing act on in tight shots, specifically within the crease area. And he was overly reactive. His athleticism would be used against him. So the poise that you see, the calculation you see within some of these other smaller goalies to translate, like Wolf and Saros and Levi, who's going to translate here in a bit, they had a level that he has not shown this season at all. Okay. And then the third component of this is the release point reads. His release point reads are good, but he's 5'11". They can't be good. They have to be exceptional to elite. That's the difference between a small goalie being able to translate to one that can't. He had way too many rebound situations this year where he would stop the first shot. And then, yes, he had phenomenal rate of recovery and sometimes would make spectacular saves off of them. But he'd also have many, many pucks where he would be just punting pucks directly into the slot area. And then he would have to deal with that. And it led to a lot of secondary rebound goals. So those are the big four issues I have with them. I do think the first major issue, which is the set stance, can be heavily modified so he can access his skating better, get his hand positioning up higher. That can all be switched. He's going to look more like Petteri Rimpinen and Michael McIvor long term. But the other factors are much harder to be able to make up for long term. It's going to take a ton of development from him to make up those differences. Now, we still have him at 9, which I know for a lot of you is like, well, that's so low. Honestly, that's given him a lot of benefit of the doubt because he is gifted. He is dynamic. And I do think, I agree with some people, if you get him out of Brampton, I honestly do think he can thrive and take off at a bit better rate. But this comes back to probability. Like we have no goalies who have had as inconsistent a season as he has at his size that have ever translated. So when you see media have this kid is like technically flawless, smartest player we've ever seen, Canada's darling child, Zach Ficali 2.0, top, put him in the first round. It's all nonsense. I'm going to be honest. I'm going to call out everybody. It's absolutely ridiculous. It's absolutely just preposterous. And I wish the kid nothing but success. I hope the kid has a phenomenal career. I really do.
He's going to play at Michigan University next year. So I don't know. Does that play? Because you mentioned, like, I kind of want him to be out of Brampton. Now he's going to Michigan, top U.S., one of the top program in U.S. college. But, like, is he going to face a lot of quality shots will be my question there. Because Michigan should be I mean, I know last year they had an average season, but in a normal season, Michigan should be a really good team. So, how do you feel about this move for him? Like, it's a great program, but is it a great program for a goalie that might not phase? It depends. Like, I don't know. Maybe Michigan next year is average again, and he does face a lot more shots. But I don't know. How do you feel about the move to Michigan for him?
Well, he didn't dominate the OHL. So he's going up a level without dominating the previous league. Do you know what it reminds me of? Emil Vinny. Emil Vinny in his -1 didn't dominate U20 Sorry. He went into Messis. He wasn't very good. I don't like it. I don't like when a player goes up a level without dominating the previous level, especially in net. I think now it depends on how many games he plays. And like obviously going to Michigan, it allows him more access to strength and conditioning over the course of the year. So that's a positive. And we'll see how it plays out. I mean, the one thing, Jérôme, is like we don't know how this is going to go for these goalies getting an opportunity to enter college through the CHL, right? It's all happening in real time right now. So we'll see exactly the rate of translation depending on how fast they end up in college over the coming years.
Yeah, I'm assuming they're bringing him to be their number one guy. Like, what would be the point? Basically, of him leaving Brampton to be a backup goalie in college. We might not be super high on him for the NHL, but like for junior or college, he's going to be a really good goalie. But he's going to have to be better than he was this year because he's going up a level. So he's it's going to be interesting to watch him with Michigan next year. So moving on to our number 8 ranked goalie, and we stick to the OHL. Again, I'm sure no one has this goalie rank above Ivankovic anywhere. Michael McIvor from the North Bay Battalion. So let's talk about him, Brad. He's a bit undersized goalie, but he's got more size than Ivankovic. So your take on him? He's a second year eligible, so he went undrafted last season. So that it is a second year of draft eligibility, and hopefully he gets drafted this time around.
Well, he went to Montreal's camp, and they didn't sign him, and I bet you they're kicking themselves now. I really think he gets drafted this time around. So McIvor, yeah. So McIvor, one thing we always look for, Jérôme, as you know, is we look for players that have like a good self-assessment, a good awareness of their own game, and have good comparisons for their own game. And his is very good. Michael McIvor thinks that his game is somewhat similar stylistically to Jonathan Quick's. And I think that's a great comparable. I think it really is similar to Jonathan Quick. So 6.5 feet tall, lightning athlete, like not as athletically gifted as Ivankovic in some areas. So his lateral transfer rates aren't as explosive as Ivankovic, and his transitional butterfly and rate of recovery on in-tight saves, I would say, is slightly under Ivankovic's. But his dexterity, when he's rotating his core in a full split and trying to make like ridiculous glove or blocker saves, is actually, I think, ahead of Ivankovic. And I expect it to be ahead even in, though McIvor's a bit older. I don't think Ivankovic's going to catch it. Like that's how unbelievably nimble this goalie can be when he's in a full split or fully extended. Human highlight reel, one of the best goalies when it comes to like being able to make high danger saves, especially off of in-tight plays. High danger lateral transfer plays from like circle to circle or from low to high. He has all those saves in sequence all day. He's unbelievable in those areas. He now, like Petteri Rimpinen, I do like his set stance. Love his glove positioning. He has a very good glove, which is like Ivankovic. I don't know if I mentioned the Ivankovic glove, but both of them have a very good glove. That's one area of strength that I really like out of Ivankovic's game, and McIvor shares that. However, where I think he actually has Ivankovic naturally beaten, the reason he's very slightly higher on the list is the poise. This kid's poise is at a level that Ivankovic's wasn't this previous season. So it's up to Ivankovic to be able to catch up to that. And we'll see what happens here. But McIvor reads the game relatively well. He's an exceptional athlete. And he's one of those goalies where you can never count him out on a play. His compete battle level effort level is truly remarkable. There are so many examples this year where I thought he was beat, and then he just somehow managed to get a pad back in front of it. And the reason that I bring up that there are so many plays that look like he has beat was because some of his base positioning does have to improve. He can have difficulty with extending overlap positioning and not square up to far side shots where it puts him at a disadvantage. So that's one area he certainly has to improve big time. So he's very athletic, but there's still a tendency for him to sometimes overutilize the athleticism without being able to take advantage of his mental capacity. And he has a big one. So it's just all about the consistency rates of this player. He reminds me of Jérôme a little bit of Meloche in that instance, where some of the Meloche's best games were like, oh, this is a real deal player. And then some of his worst performances like, oh no, where's his technique? Everything's dying down. And McIvor has that as well, just not to the same degree Meloche has it this time. But the thing with McIvor that's interesting is like last season he was phenomenal in the playoffs, but he was struggling a lot as a backup for North Bay. So it was one of those situations where I think a lot of goaltending scouts didn't know which version was the real one, so we're waiting this season to see. And he presented the real one very early, and that was the playoff version that we saw last season, and the one that I think Montreal was very interested in. So very, very interesting smaller goalie, but one that I think has actual translation ability because his skating is exceptional, rate of recovery is exceptional, extension rates are exceptional, athleticism's there, he's poised, and his is just so combative, such a competitive goalie. There is no chance that North Bay makes the playoffs without him. He was North Bay's MVP unquestionably. Without him, there's no chance. So I really like him. Needs to fix some things, but there's a very interesting base to mold.
All right, let's move on to our number 7 ranked goalie. So we just did 2 smaller goalie with Ivankovic and McIvor. So now we go to Russia with Arseni Radkov, who's a 6'4" goalie, more of the usual size of goalie that we usually go for. Doesn't play for a big time NHL team in Russia. If you're like maybe a follower of the draft or an average fan, if we name you the team that he plays for, you'd probably be like, oh, it's not CSKA, it's not SKA, it's not Krasnaya, it's not Loco. No. So it's a bit of a not as well known team. So Brad, tell us about Arseni Radkov. Not super well known if you look at various draft rankings for goalie, like he's not really mentioned anywhere. So let's tell the audience about Arseni Radkov.
Absolutely. Well, I thought he was going to be our dark horse of dark horses, but Central just managed to find him in their last list. They just managed to sneak him in there. So Teuminski legions the team, and to Jerome's point, there are no prospects out of that system. Ironically, the last one that was taken was a goalie, and that was by Florida in the 7th round. I can't remember his name to save my life. It's a very unique name. Very interesting goalie, but he was taken the 7th. So with Radkov, you're looking at potential back-to-back picks out of Teuminski and net, which, again, is incredibly rare. 6'4", 180 pounds, one of the youngest goalies in this draft, and he was the backup in the MHL. So this is where things get very complicated for us because he's the only backup that we have on this list. There are no other goalies that we have ranked that were simply in a backup position over the course of the season. I'm staring at the list right now. I don't think, none of them. So that makes our life harder because, Jérôme, as you know, in the MHL, that means his quality of competition is going to be less than it is relative to goalies like Frolov and Andreyanov when we get to see them against top teams. So that makes my life a lot harder, and also means that I have to weight performances against the off time he does play against a good team, such as Omsk. One of his best performances was against Omsk, so I had to weight that performance heavily relative to some others as an example of this. That said, what you see is very interesting. So I think of him as a more interesting Elijah Neuenschwander. And what that means is 6'4", very reflexive, excellent kicking reflexes, very good base, presents relatively well, though he's a bit awkward. I mean, sometimes when he's in a relaxed sense, he'll enter like a T-pose position, which is like a muscle relaxed in bodybuilding, or T-pose, like if any of you play like video games out there and you've seen glitches and you see characters just T-posing around with their arms up like this and everything running around. That he's kind of like that. He has a really weird relaxed stance where he's T-posing. I find that very odd because like normally in a relaxed stance, you want to keep your limbs relaxed so that you don't overstress them or strain them too early in a game. And I bring that up because his hands were all over the map. Like his blocker and glove, depending on the game, I found were like very sporadic relative to some of the other players we're discussing today. So that's an area where he needs to shore up. That said, when he's playing up to his ability, I mean, he can get to every puck. Again, the reflexes in tight are exceptional, so he can get high danger saves stopped in tight to him off of redirects or point blank backdoor entries. He can stop all that. And in his best performances, I would say the only thing that he showed a true deficiency in was that he would back up too much in his net. He would give up too much. There's a point in net where, depending on the speed that the player's coming in at you, you want to be able to back up only to a point and then stop and then force them to make a next move. Okay. And for us, he would back up a little too much, give up too much of his net relative to his size. So that's one area where, again, he would shell up a little bit, and we need him to over the course of his development here, really get back out in front of pucks and really present large and attack and cut down on angles more than he currently does. So that to me speaks of a lack of confidence. And Jérôme, as you know, like backup position in the NHL, sometimes they're playing once every 2 to 3 weeks, which means there's not a lot of reps, which usually if you don't get a lot of reps, you're not going to feel as comfortable. If you're not going to feel as comfortable, your confidence level is going to die down a bit. And I think that's what was occurring here with this player. That said, he's, correct me if I'm wrong, Jérôme, pretty sure he's projected to go to college the season after next season here. So
yeah, I think so.
So that indicates to me he's coming over the CHL. And if he's coming over the CHL, that indicates NHL teams have been talking to him. That's usually an indicator. So I'm on Artur Silovs. We were speaking to Artur Silovs during his draft year, his agent during his draft year. Haven't been an opportunity to speak to Arseni Radkov's agent or anything, but usually there's an indicator that some teams must be interested and that he is already told them he's interested in coming to CHL, if that's what we're seeing. So that really changes the trajectory of where he might get drafted. So I thought of him, I have him as a 4th rounder. But if he's already indicated he's coming over, there might be a team that might like him even more than I do. And I like him. I think there's a lot here to work with. He's just a bit under the top 6 to me, but not by much. And we'll see with the growth rate. He's an August birthday. There's a whole lot here to like over time. So it's just one of those situations where he's just slightly under Hood for me and Pradel. So, but he's within that range.
Yeah, he's committed to UMass, which is like a decent school in the Hockey East Conference for 2026, 2027. You could also play in the USHL, depending, but that's great for the kids now. They have a bunch of options. They can go USHL, they can go CHL with like the WHL, OHL, the Q. So I would assume that he will be somewhere in North America next season. So that's going to be interesting to see where he goes and how he does next year in North America. So okay, for number 6 ranked player is Burke Hood of the Vancouver Giants of the WHL. Great name, by the way. Big time, good size goalie from the Giants. Really, we didn't know a lot about him at the start of the year. He was not really on our watch list to start the year, but he really impressed us this year. He was at the U18 but didn't really play. Did he play? I don't think he played at the U18, but it was mostly Ivankovic. But he was there for a bit. Interesting goalie. We loved obviously the size, Brad. And also I like he's a hard worker. He works hard in his crease. He's a bit, I would say he's a bit raw. I don't know if you agree, but there's some stuff that needs to be worked on. But I remember the first time you actually made me watch him, and my first reaction watching him, I was like, he looks like Adrian Hill of Vegas in that, just the way he moves, and how he finds a way to make save. So interesting goalie. He's number 6 on the list. So, Brad, let's talk about Burke Hood.
Well, it's so funny you bring up that your comp firm is Adin Hill, because my comp is Laurent Brossoit, and they're both Vegas goalies. So I guess it's guaranteed Vegas drafts this goalie now. So yeah, it's interesting. I agree with you though. Adin Hill does absolutely share characteristics with this goalie. He does. I think it's a pretty good comp too. Again, these are loose comps. Okay. Yeah. So Burke Hood, this is a goalie that's fascinating because it's kind of he was a backup for Vancouver. But then he was given the reign once they traded their star. I can't remember the starter's name off the top of my head, but they traded him, and he was brought in to be their full-time starter. He had to move from backup to starter, and that's when his game took off. I thought he was super inconsistent when I first laid eyes on him. And I remember, Jerome, we talked about this. When we first saw him, it was like, okay, this is a pretty good blocking style goalie, but he's a bit under. And then you watch more and you're like, oh no, he's battle level's crazy, and he's actually a pretty good athlete. He just doesn't always display it. So that was like the initial takeaway. But the base of this player is that he's a hybrid goalie. And now I know I've explained what hybrid goalies are. Last season, for instance, I discussed Timofey Vintsov as a hybrid goalie, but that was much more because of a stand-up variation, which we're going to get to in Andreyanov in a bit here. However, this is a hybrid goalie in the sense that he's kind of a blocking style goalie in terms of his athletic components, but then he's more mentally an athletic style goalie. So there's a hybrid variation. So from the blocking style component, it's that he stays sealed and he stays tight while he's dynamically moving. So very similar to man's Goos from that perspective, Jerome, where you look at him when he's getting out in front of the puck, when traffic's around him, and if he has to make point blank redirect saves, everything, he's very good at dynamically shifting while sealing. That's the blocking component that's very impressive by him. He can also stay calm, composed. However, the athletic components come out when he has to break technique. And that's one of the fundamental differences between him and some other, what you would say is a typical blocking style goalie, such as Michal Pradel, who we'll get to, where his technique breaking points are ahead of Pradel's, and that's why we refer to him as a hybrid. And so the technique breaking with the blocking style is really what makes him fascinating, because he will stay contained, he will stay sealed, he'll stay tight, he'll stay poised, he'll read the play relatively well, he'll absorb the first shot. That's what you want. But then when things get chaotic, he can just break that technique, and then you see athleticism that you did not expect to see. The small area skating game is a bit behind some of these other goalies. I think, for instance, when you compare him to Arseni Radkov has a better small area skating game, but then Burke's large area skating game, I think, is slightly ahead of Radkov. So there's a give and take there in terms of goalies that are back-to-back on our list. The glove hand is a problem. High gloves specifically, and it's something we didn't catch until much later in the season. Again, this is the thing about goaltending. Goaltending's crazy because you can watch game after game, full games like I've done, but then you might miss a critical component of the goalie until you actually start parsing and peeling the layers back of their individual qualities. And so I focused on the glove hand late in the season. I did like 100 shot sample of his glove, and it was a bit under what I expected on that. And that's something I never noticed in full games, for instance. So that is why he moved back. We actually had him in the top 5, pulled him back slightly as a result of that. But in terms of his consistency towards the end of the season and what he brought to the Giants, I thought he was awesome. Like I struggle having to keep him 6 here. I think he's the most, I would argue publicly, the most underrated goalie, because I've never really seen him talked about. You don't see, I think Central had him way outside the top 15 in North America, which to me is I don't see that. I think he's a much, much higher end goalie than that. And I think he's just getting started. I think he's just getting the party started. This kid has a lot of potential. I really think a Laurent Brossoit comp / Adin Hill. Let's bring him in. Adin Hill and Brossoit. I think there's some stylistic comparisons we made there, and I think he could have a similar career to Brossoit as well, where you could get a very good backup that, if needed, can be a starter for durations of time.
Yeah. All right. Let's move on to our top 5. And our number 5th ranked goalie is Aleksei Medvedev from the OHL champion and Memorial Cup champion London Knights, but unfortunately he didn't play in the playoff. So he was the backup in the playoff. I don't know if there's a goalie that we had more discussion about than Medvedev this year with our boss, Mark Edwards. It's one of them was like trying to guess how tall he was, and he went from 6 feet to 6'3", during a few months. So some really fun conversation about Medvedev this year. So yeah, let's start with him playing in front of a really good team, more as a backup, more in a backup role. I'll say this, me personally, like I don't have as much viewing as Brad, but I feel like every game that I watched, he gave up a bad goal. Like there was some really, I saw a lot of bad goals being, giving up by him. But again, my sample is a bit. I mean, it's much smaller than Brad. So, but it was just like it's like every time I watch him, and sometimes I was not even watching him. I was watching other player and like shift by shift video, and it's like, oh, here's a bad goal by Medvedev. So, anyway, that was a funny thing that kept happening for me with him this year. But we know he's one of the youngest goalie in the draft. He's a September birthday. He's going to turn 18 in September. There's a lot of room to grow with this player, and there's some good tools to work with. So, Brad, I'll let you the microphone here and maybe explain why Medvedev is now our number 5 ranked goalie.
Sure. Well, I'll say at the start, he was as you mentioned a bit there, the one that took the longest to get around to being on board with. And there were several reasons. So one was I really thought he was more 6'1", not 6'3", which it turns out to be his listing is like 6'2 3/4", I believe. So he's going to get to 6'3" for sure. And the other factor is that his name is Medvedev and he's Russian, but he doesn't play Russian. Okay. And you can see it within his game. So this is where we bring up the Russian base instinct factor and why Russia is so far ahead of the rest of the industry when it comes to developing goalies. The position has to be predicated off of a base instinct, and then you work around that base instinct and add technical components to it in order to get a successful goalie. So, for instance, if you look at Ilya Sorokin and Bobrovsky, when they first started out, they were hyper athletes who use raw instinct a ton. And then over the course of their careers here, they've been slowly implementing, adding technical foundations and layers to their game. And now they look phenomenal, right? And that's the problem with North American goaltending development is that they just smash technique into a goalie at too young an age. Right? And it's not working. You have to allow a goalie breathing room when they're young to get a base instinct for the position and then mold around that. This is where Medvedev really struggled for me out of the gate because he's technically impressive in a lot of areas, but there's this lack of instinct to him, and as a result, a lack of technical breaking points within his foundation. So, for instance, an example of this: if he gets behind on a lateral transfer, he'll stay too sealed and keep everything very tight technically because that's what he's been bred to do. But then it's time for him to break technique and just try to get anything on a puck, and he won't do it. All right. And this happened. Spencer Knight is, to me, the best example of this ever. Like if Spencer Knight developed from the age of 15 in Russia and then came over, I think he'd be twice the goalie he is. So from that perspective, I was behind on this player because I saw a lot of that. Now, this goes back to full games. So you watched in full games of him watching full games. And the big thing for me was that there was a lack of reactionary ability within his foundation on in-tight shots to the net. His reflexes were good, but his ability to react correctly in tight was not good. And I really thought that was a massive issue, kind of like the way you did, Jérôme, where you thought he had a massive issue with the mental glitches when it came to giving him bad goals, right? So we look at that, and I agree with you. There's performance where he played well and then led in a terrible goal, and you're like, oh, God, here we go. However, to counteract that a bit, look at the team he was on, right? London, dominant CHL team, one of the best teams, if not the best team in the CHL. I mean, they just won the Memorial Cup. They won the OHL. So it's one of those situations where, like Spencer Knight, I'm going to draw some comparisons again, on the program, it was impossible for him to play the position properly because the team was so dominant. In London, I found that was the case in some games too with Medvedev. So Medvedev, I think part of the issue with his mental consistencies is a direct result of his team being just too darn good for the position. So I'm going to give him some benefit of the doubt there when it comes to the mental glitches, which I agree with you, he did have. However, back to this reactionary aspect, when I looked at him in full games, I really thought it was under, but where I came on board was when I took I believe it was a 240 shot sample, something like that. It was big, and it was basically this whole season with his shot sample in tight to the net. It turned out I was wrong. And that's the pain of this position. Like this position is not like other positions. You can go watch 20 games of a center, and you're good to go. You don't even have to break down the rest. If you got 20 games, you're good to go. Now, don't get me wrong. Of course, you can do some extra homework there. You can break down his shot. You can break down 200 games of 200 shot sample and get a better idea of exactly how his shooting mechanics operate, what he's trying to do. You can do passing samples of 15 games deep, take you a couple hours, and you really get a better understanding of a player. But the point is, you get the base if you watch 20 games of a player. In net, you got to make contrast happen. You got to watch full games. You got to watch them as often as you can, and then you got to really break down and isolate aspects of their game to make sure that you're correct in some of those areas. And that's where I was wrong, and why I'm now on board is that he's actually a lot more reflexive and reactionary in tight than I expected. I actually thought he was in the Ivankovic territory, if not worse, and it turned out he was a lot better, and he's younger. So it was one of those situations where I was like, okay, 6'3", he's the youngest goalie in the draft. I'm wrong about his reactionary saves in tight. And another interesting factor, Jérôme, was we found this out of the combine. He has one of the top 10 longest limb lengths in the entire draft. Like his wingspan is top 10. So that's fascinating because it means that long term, once he fills out, he's going to have mechanical leverage advantages within his hands, within his blocker and glove that a lot of these other goalies are not going to have. And that means he can use them to place pucks in dead areas of the ice at a higher level. He should be very efficient with his upper body when it comes to his rebound control long term in a way that I had not projected before. And then you factor in the fact that he's got a really good glove hand. Like his glove is like legitimately, I would say it's under Ivankovic's and McIvor's, but not by much. And he's very young, so there's growth rate potential there. And it starts showcasing like a pretty darn good goalie. He sets well. He has access to his edges, and his lateral transition rates improved as the year unfolded. And his hip line and extension rates are very good. They're where they need to be. So I'd argue, one of the most well-rounded goalies in this class. And he has a high growth rate of potential, and he's a good system. So everything, and London's not going to be as good next year, I don't think, relative to this season. And that's a good thing for his development. He needs more high danger shots and more volume and consistency than he got this season. And he needs tighter games. Like London, Jérôme, how many times do we see London blow out other teams this season, right? It makes life a lot more difficult for that position. So you take all that into consideration. I think Medvedev makes sense for the top 5.
All right. Moving on from Medvedev, we're going to Michal Pradel of the Tri-City Storm of the USHL, Slovakian goalie that we first saw at the Olympia tournament. I thought he was really good there. Looks like, to me, back then, like for sure a pick. Then he went back to Slovakia. It was a bit underwhelming. Also, it was tough to get viewings where he played. And then he finally came over in the second half of the season, finished the year with Tri-City. Not sure what the plans are for him next season. Maybe he's going back to the USHL, or I don't think he's committed to any college. I'll verify that after Brad talks about him. But 6'5" goalie, really interesting. I think he's one of those goalies that did really, because we did mention the top 3 is the top 3. Didn't really the top 3 didn't move for us. It's mostly after those 3 guys that it really moved around for us during the year, and Pradel was one of them. Started in that range. I believe he was 4 or 5 at the start of the year, and then did drop, but then came back strong in the second half of the season with more quality viewings that we had in the USHL. So, Brad, tell our audience about Michal Pradel.
Yeah, so he's the true blocking style goalie of the top 5 for us. Like this is a blocking style goalie, and that means he is reliant more on his size and his ability to seal and stay upright and posturally correct within his butterfly. I bring up the butterfly because pound for pound, the best transitional butterfly goalie in this class. This goalie's butterfly is phenomenal. His ability to transition back out of it at 6'5" is also phenomenal. He's almost always on balance, unlike Gabriel D'Aigle that we discussed earlier, where he's over the top of himself. His posterior chain's lacking, so he's always over the top of himself out of that butterfly, and he can't activate out of his edges as a result sometimes. Where with Pradel, he can. So that's the technical foundation of this player is incredibly enticing. It's very hard to find a kid who's young, 6'5", with a tremendous amount of technical ability already. He's poised. I would say Jekyll and Hyde here, Jerome, tale of two seasons, as you suggested. Though I would argue that some of his best performances, if not his best performances, are actually over in Slovakia too, because he was in a similar situation to Regnars Capars in the sense that he was playing in Slovakia U18, where their defense was atrocious at times, and he was playing in pro hockey, so he was under siege. So the top three goalies that faced the most shot volume were Capars and Gabriel D'Aigle and this kid. So that's the top three in terms of shot volume and shot quality faced. And in Slovakia too, I mean, there were performances where he was having to stop 60 plus shots. And there were other performances like one specifically against Galicia where he let in 9 goals in a game. However, this is the thing. When you see a goalie who's going to let in 9 goals, it gives us an opportunity to see the rebound effect. Can he come back from bad performances like that, where you typically don't see junior goalies letting in 9 type of thing, right? And he did do that. He followed up that performance against Trebisov and had one of the best performances, I thought, of the season. So it showed his ability to battle. That said, I would argue his battle level is actually probably the lowest of the top 5. That is 1 and 6. If you bring in Hood here, I think his battle level is a bit restricted. And I think one of the reasons why is because he's too technically proficient for even his own good sometimes. And that's why I bring in the blocking style aspect, right? When you see the technique breaking points and the athleticism comes out, that's where you start thinking about more of an athletic goalie. This goalie has athletic components. We wouldn't be talking about him if he didn't. Again, transitional butterfly is phenomenal. He's very fluid at times, very coordinated. I would argue the best blocker side in this entire class outside of maybe Semyon Frolov. So extraordinary dexterity in his blocker, and he knows it. And I love the fact he knows it because it speaks to a kid who understands his own game. So for instance, one thing he was very good at was baiting opposing players into shooting short side on him, because he would specifically see cut back, drift back into his net on an angle where he would actually allow more room for the short side purposely. So they tried to shoot on his blocker. He was baiting players onto his blocker side. That's a good sign. That shows a sophistication where most of these kids this age don't have that. That's something he shares with Andreyanov. So that shows like a sixth sense in a way to understanding his own mechanics and how to take advantage of them. Now, speaking of mechanics, where he falls short is the small area skating game. It did improve over the course of the season to a degree, but it's a work in progress, and it's certainly the most critical area that he needs to improve in order to be successful, because his small area skating game hampers his ability for his rate of recovery. So when you look at rate of recovery skill sets, he's for sure the bottom of the top 5 goalies that we have ranked here. And two components as to why. One, not the best hip line. Okay, his extension rates are not nearly as good as some of these other kids we're talking about, especially in the top couple players coming up, or a couple goalies we're about to discuss. But the other factor, and it's more pressing to me, is the groin dexterity. His flexibility within his groin is not great, which means he does not have the ability to really hit low to the ice and enter splits very often at all. That's where, again, the rate of recovery comes in. He needs some of that going forward so he can compensate when he's misread the initial play, or if his rebound controls let him down, which occasionally it does, especially on high shots that are labeled up high on his chest, because it's very good to have fantastic posture when you're 6'5" and stay tall because you take up so much of the net. But there's times where you want to absorb pucks and you have to coil and fold your shoulder line inward so you can cut pucks and have them drop in front of you and get the rebound. He's had some difficulty with that, and that was right through the season, right through Slovakia, right through the USHL. And with the USHL, the team who's on Tri-City was not very good, and their defense was somewhat poor, I thought. So he's a kid who's trying to adapt, split his season. He comes over to North America. He's adapting to small ice. The defense isn't very good. I thought he looked pedestrian in some performances. That's where we started having some yo-yo effect of where exactly we're going to put this kid. What are we going to do with him? I watched every game of this kid. I watched every game this season of Pradel, and I still honestly don't really know where we should ultimately put him. But we've decided that this is the correct spot for him. I hope it's right, because Burke Hood was up here. We moved him back to make space for Pradel. But sometimes Pradel looks like he's not going to have enough in the tank in terms of his technique breaking points, the groin flexibility, the hip line, the rate of recovery, the small area skating. It all looks a bit under, but I'm betting on the growth rate. I'm betting on the technical foundation. I'm betting on that beautiful butterfly transition. I'm betting on the size and the version in Slovakia too that had peak performances were spectacular. So that's what we're betting on. But admittedly, like, I'm a human being. I make mistakes. I made a ton last season in areas I shouldn't have with this position, and I'm trying to make up for it now. But admittedly, Pradel might be a bit too high, but who knows? Maybe he's a bit too low too, Jerome. Time will tell.
All right, now we're in the crunch time with our top 3 goalie that have not really moved all year long. So we're going to start with our third ranked goalie, Semyon Frolov, out of Russia, obviously. Played for 3 different MHL teams this season. Weird. I have no explanation for it. But he's a really good goalie. He's got the size. Brad will talk a lot more about him, but he's a very interesting goalie that should be a top 2 round pick in the draft. But yeah, the fact that he played for 3 different MHL teams is a bit, I would say, weird. Usually, because he's a good goalie, so usually a good goalie will stay with the same team. It's not like he really struggled with any of those teams. So interesting. And I mean, you never know with Russia. So there's always stuff that we don't understand about what's going on with the MHL. So Brad, let's talk about Semyon Frolov, who, like I said, should be a top two round pick in 2 weeks.
Sure. So he falls in the hyper athletic category. We're out of the blocking style. So, and don't get me wrong, with Pradel, he can make scorpion kick saves. Like, one of the best saves I saw this season was off a penalty shot where he made the scorpion kick save. It's beautiful. There's still athletic components there, but we're talking hyper athletes. So the 2 small hyper athletes are Ivankovic and McIvor. We've gone over. Now we're at the big hyper athletes. So you're talking Frolov, you're talking Ravensbergen. So Ravensbergen is not as athletically gifted as this kid. This kid might be the best athlete in this entire class. The reason why is because he has a multi-directional hip line. We've talked about hip line, hip dexterity, hip girdles, hip everything. This kid can actually change his hip positioning in mid-transition while he's fully exploding. That's a different level of dexterity. That's one of those genetic components that you can't train it. You can't go to a gym and train it. It's just you have that or you don't. He is an absolute freak of nature. What it means is that if he misassesses an initial angle, like Sam Meloche does, well, Meloche is in trouble because he can't re-square. He can't change his hip line back and get back in front of the puck and use a micro or macro adjustment depending on the save. This kid can do that. This kid is a freak. Now, again, unlike Meloche, we talked about rigid upper half, and this goes with Ravensbergen a bit too, a little more rigid with his upper half. This kid's dexterity in his upper frame is spectacular. He has arguably the most dexterous upper frame. So you have a multi-directional hip line with the best mobility in his shoulder girdle out of any goalie. So we're talking about the freak of freaks here. Now, like most freaks, that means that the technical base is lagging. This is not the best technical goalie in this class. He is under Andreyanov. He is under Ravensbergen. This is the main reason we factored him in the 3 slot. However, I have had him as high as 1. We had him as high as 1 when he was playing in Tagliata's system at the beginning of the season. And to your point, Jerome, I have no idea why he was transferred. Why is he on 3 separate teams? Because it made our life very difficult because he's dealing with 3 different systems, different goalie coaches, And I thought he looked completely out of sorts depending on where he was. So it was a much more sporadic season relative to Andrianov's, and in some ways even Ravensbergen, even though Ravensbergen was very mentally inconsistent, this kid was very sporadic as well. And so what that meant was there were certain performances where he looked like for sure the top-ranked goalie and had like unbelievable, spectacular, dynamic saves. And then in other performances were like, oh my God, he's way under what I thought, right? And so it's a give and take there. But in terms of technique, the big areas that he's lagging behind is that when you watch him, like for instance, if you watch Michal Pradel relative to him, there's an efficiency and smoothness to Pradel when it comes to his integration in his post, his RVH, transferring from his butterfly. An easy save looks easy to Pradel. With Frolov, an easy save can become a really difficult and dangerous situation for him to deal with. And that's a result of his technique breaking down at the wrong time. So, for instance, if he's integrating into his RVH position, he might not stay sealed. Now a puck's under his skates. Now he's flopping all over the ice trying to kick the puck off his goal line, and it should never have been on the goal line in the first place. Should have everything tight, sealed, stay low to the ice, and been fine. And that goes right through. So his basic overlap positioning, for instance, he's such a good athlete. Sometimes he gets overextended out of his net, and his spatial awareness isn't there, loses his net, loses his crease, and now he's struggling. He's going to have to try to reintegrate with his post, then enter a full split on the next on the other side of the net because somebody's wrapping the puck around him. So there was a lot of situations where the overlap positioning, the crease containment, and basic aspects of his butterfly or RVH would let him down, and then pucks would become leaky, and chaos was ensuing as a result of it. So that said, is most of that a byproduct of having to go through 3 different systems? And that's the question. That's the debate. What if he was in Krasnaya's system, Jérôme? Or are we looking at it differently, right? That was something that we discussed and we had to figure out by the end of the season here. But we ultimately decided to move him back slightly because of it. But make no mistake, the freak factor is extraordinarily real. And this is where we get to the draft, everybody, where, as Jérôme mentioned early on in this podcast, this is the big 3. Okay, this is the 3-headed hydra. These 3 goalies, for me, are the bona fide top-end goalies. They're a tier range above the rest in this class, and all of them, I think, are real high-end quality starters if they develop correctly. And this is where I'm willing to bet NHL teams have the discrepancy. You might see Frolov 1 on a list. You might see Andriyanov 1 on another list. You might see Ravensbergen drop back to 3 on a list, okay? And we've had the same discussions internally and had Ravensbergen, Andriyanov, Frolov flipped all around these 3 slots. So Frolov's a bit more raw in some areas, but he has beautiful technique breaking points, multi-directional hip line, incredible dexterity. He's a freak athlete, and he can do everything you want him to do. He's also a bit heavy set. So he falls into the next category. We'll talk about Andriyanov, where what happens when he gets on a real conditioning program? What happens with his transfer rates then, since they're already the best? And he's a bit heavy set. Well, look out. So tons to like there. Look for him to get picked extremely high on draft day.
Okay, and number 2, we go back to Russia with Pyotr Andreyanov, who me personally is my favorite goalie in the draft. Really impressive goalie. Again, a bit like Medvedev. There's been some argument about how tall he is. He's been listed 6'2" in some plays, but I don't know. I don't know if I believe it. But he's actually one player that we really wish he was at the combine, so we could get his real height. Although he might be there will be another combine for Russian players in Florida, so he should be there. So we might get his real height. But I love that goalie. I think he's, like I wrote in one of my quotes, I think he's a rock star in that. I think he's really confident. And I think for a smaller goalie, if he's 6 foot, I think he does. I do have confidence that he can make it. Like he does. Is he perfect? Probably no, but he's close to it for me. In what he brings to the table. So there's not many 6 foot goalie in the NHL. He's also like, I mean, it's a bad thing and a good thing at the same time. He's well over 200 pounds. So usually that means they're probably not in the best shape, or I mean, we wouldn't know until we can actually test him. But usually, if you're 6 feet, 207 pounds, you're probably not in the best condition physically. But it doesn't show on the ice because he's awesome. He's an awesome goalie. He moves well on the ice. You wouldn't know that from watching him on the ice. So he's a bit. Brad will probably mention this because we have talked about this many times before, but it's very similar to Jacob Fowler back in 2023. So Brad will probably mention that, but and Fowler is looking pretty good for Montreal. Went to college, got in really really good shape, and had two great year at Boston College, and now he's going to start his pro career. And Andreyanov, like, we think once he gets in a real, in a great physical condition, I wouldn't say sky's the limit with him because there's some probably limitation because he's only 6 foot tall. But for a smaller goalie, we really like him. I wouldn't say he's at the same level as Dustin Wolf or Devon Levi, but he's not far. He's not far from Devon Levi for me. So time will tell in this case. So Brad, maybe you can start your analysis on this pretty interesting goalie out of Russia.
Sure, he's a Russian Jacob Fowler. No, so okay, let's start. So Krasnaya's system. Let's talk about Krasnaya's system in the MHL. So pound for pound, I think probably one of the best goalie development systems in the world, and I think that because what they do is second to none in terms of trying to evaluate technically how to improve the position relative to what we're seeing in the NHL. For example, right now in the NHL, what we're seeing is a lot of shooters attempting to exploit the RVH position because so many goalies are overutilizing it. And if you can get them to collapse into it, that gives them more room upstairs to shoot at, right? So one thing I've noticed in Krasnaya's system, which we discussed last year with Timofey Avintsev, was that they are implementing hybrid mechanics in some of these goalies. And sure enough, like Timofey Avintsev, Pyotr Andreyanov has had hybrid stand-up qualities implemented into his game. Now, what's fascinating about that is he's actually, we think 6.5 feet. We don't really know. He might be 6'1", maybe 6'2", but let's for sure 6 feet. Okay. And so having hybrid mechanics can actually be extremely beneficial. And the other factor is that he's not that long, right? So the extension rates, even though he does fully extend, they're not going to be at the same level as Frolov that we just discussed or Ravensbergen that we're about to discuss. So what that means is that his battling level and his scrambling instincts need to be exceptional. And this is one of the separating components of this goalie. True savants at this position can blend otherworldly technique with insane scrambling. Okay, that's when you get something freakish in net. Okay, Pekka Rinne, by the end of his career, when his technique caught up, you saw some of that. Andrei Vasilevsky can do a whole lot of that. Igor Shesterkin, Sorokin, Sarah, like all of them, right? All the top end guys can do it to varying degrees. He's the one in this class that can do that at the highest rate. Michal Pradel, that we just discussed, does it the least. That's where Pradel has difficulties, the secondary recovery saves and the ability to break technique to scramble. So with Andreyanov, you're getting a goalie who can be susceptible to bigger players who cut in on him with range, but then he'll throw everything to the wind. He'll, whatever it takes to get out in front of a puck, stop a puck, he'll do it. He's a contortionist. That's extremely important because, as Jerome mentioned, he's heavy set. Now, two things about being a heavy set goalie. One is it means that the kid is a freak of nature and has never had to actually dial in his nutrition because he's just been able to get away with it, which is the case. So in a sense, that's a good thing. Okay, it's one of those BJ Penn effects that I call it, where BJ Penn, for all of you, if you don't watch MMA, he's called the prodigy for a reason. Arguably the original freak of nature from a fighting perspective, but then he was so gifted naturally, he never dialed it in terms of his conditioning, in terms of his in terms of his training. And so he just never became what he was supposed to, even though he's a legendary fighter. So it happens with some of these kids who are freaks in nature. This is where there's a bit of limitation or not limitation, a bit of a worry or concern for us with this goalie going forward, because in order for him to take off, he has to do what Jacob Fowler did. Jacob Fowler rightfully understood that his nutrition was behind. He was too heavy set, so his lateral transfer rates died down as a result of that. We made the bet, rightfully. We had him top 3. We had him as a very early second rounder. Montreal would have never gotten him if we were there. And the reason was because if you make the bet that he loses 20 pounds of fat and puts on 8 to 10 pounds of muscle, then he'd look way different in terms of transfer rates, and we were correct. Andrianov's transfer rates are already really good, and he's heavy set. What is he going to look like, Jerome, when he's actually got like more of a Dustin Wolf type of physique on him? Right? And that's where I'm with Jerome, where, man, he might just be number 1. We had a tremendous amount of discussion here trying to figure out what to do with the top 2, because we really, really like Andrianov's game. Because as Jerome mentioned, when you break down his game in totality, he is the most well-rounded and technically gifted goalie who, again, can blend the instincts. He has the sixth sense reads. He's that kid who's so poised, calm. His release point reads are phenomenal. His ability to interpret when to scan the ice is spectacular. It allows him to make sure he gets to backdoor entry points. And then there's enough dexterity there that's surprising, so that when he does have to make crazy high danger saves, he can do it. His skating ability is phenomenal. He's one of the best C-cut skaters in this class, and that allows him to drift correctly at a much higher rate. We'll still be able to implement his edge work depending on if he has to make a micro adjustment in tight to him. Another massive factor that's fascinating about this goalie, I just talked about how Krasnaya, they modify goalies to try to prepare them depending on the context of what the toolkit is. So in his situation, he's a hybrid stand-up goalie. When he's looking around screens, what's happening is he'll tilt himself off an angle, off his center line, and then what he'll do is he'll actually put up his glove hand on the side that he tilted his head position on, so that it remains on one axis, one plane, so that it takes up. It's one of those situations where he knows exactly how to take up the right space at the right time when he's looking around screens, how to modify his game. He also baits opposing players into taking the wrong shots. You know who does that, Jerome? Dominik Hasek did that. Okay, that's when you know you got something special. When a goalie's so good he can trick a shooter into the wrong shot, that's when you know you got something. That is what is the separating quality of this goalie, and he needs it because, admittedly, when you look at the athletic factor, he is under Ravensbergen and Frolov. Like, for instance, for everybody listening, if he had Frolov's toolkit, we would have never even discussed Ravensbergen as 1. It's over. Like, it would be completely over. It would be him number 1 by a mile if he had anything that even looks like Frolov or Ravensbergen's toolkit. He's just 6.5 feet. He's heavy set. He looks a bit awkward at the position as a result of that. But he played extremely well. He did slow down slightly as the season progressed, but it was something we predicted because, again, his conditioning. So, the sky's the limit. I will not be shocked at all if this kid is the top goalie, goes off the board, Jerome. I think there's a lot of teams that need goalies, and they have multiple picks at the back half of the first, second round there, Jerome. I'm thinking Andrianov might surprise a lot of people.
Yeah, I still don't think he's going to go before Ravensbergen, just because the NHL is the NHL, and they'll value live viewings over video viewings. But he's fun. I love this goalie. I was really high on Devon Levi back in 2020, and I feel pretty confident. Andriyanov will be similar to what Devon Levy has been. Well, not in the NHL yet, but pretty soon I think will be. I think he had a really strong year in the AHL, so. Yeah, it was really close between Andriyanov and Ravensbergen, but we went with the safer of the two, I think, for number 1. So, well, I guess you guys know who's number 1 now. Joshua Ravensbergen is a number 1 ranked goalie out of Prince George. And what is funny about this is that I think Brad will agree. He had a better year last season. This was not like a fantastic season by him, but the tools are very, like, he looks like an NHL goalie. And he's also, we often talk about Lee Bloomer with goalies. Like, he's one. Like, he was never drafted in the WHL, came out, WHL draft is it's a bantam draft, so at 14, no team wanted him. Finally signed with Prince George like a year or 2 later, and then came out pretty much nowhere last year. Had a fantastic season, Well, fantastic season. A great first half, struggled in the second half, and then came back strong in the playoff with a great playoff. They lost, I believe, they lost in the third round against maybe Portland, if I'm not mistaken, last season. This season, not as a smooth season for him. You know, I think there's some up and down with him. Even like one thing I was surprised, it was like Ivankovic making the U20 team for the World Junior over him. Just getting an invite to camp, which Ravensbergen didn't get, and Ivankovic got. So that was surprising to me. Um, so he's an interesting goalie, obviously 6'5". He's a good athlete, but there's some work to do here. I don't know if he's I think you're drafting him based on the tools that he has, and not necessarily about what you saw from him this season. So there's some up and down from him. But Brad, what's your take about Ravensbergen and what you saw from him this season, but also the year before? Because we have 2 full season of scouting on this kid.
You're right. So the year before, that's a great way to start this off. So like Yaroslav Askarov, where we really had to wait the year before, we got to do it again. Sometimes draft years, very unpredictable, a lot of pressure. I felt like he just never looked comfortable this season at all. I don't know what it was. I don't know. Like sometimes what happens, I know this sounds strange. I'm going to go back to a fighting reference. Sometimes you tell fighters have given up before the fight starts. Like it happens around 9, somebody gets knocked out, but they'll talk about it. Like George Foreman, when he got knocked down by Ali, he talked about how the fight was already over, and it was already over. It was over before he stepped in the ring. It was over, right? Sometimes at goaltending seasons, that happens. I know it sounds crazy. It happens. Sometimes goalies, when they're coming out of camp, you can tell within the first couple of weeks of the season what's going to go down with them sometimes. And with Ravensbergen, that's the way I felt. I was like, he does not look comfortable. He does not look confident. He looks unsure of himself relative to last season. And that's because I think, Jérôme, as you mentioned, he went from who the heck is this and where'd you come from to you're number one, you're anointed. And that's, as a young kid, developing teenager, going from no pressure to all the pressure, and you're a goalie, I think that really weighed on him this season. I think it's one of the reasons that mentally, let's say it was a roller coaster, to put it quite frank. So last season, for instance, 6 shutouts. 6 shutouts looked incredible in some peak performances. We're like, oh my God, he's for sure number one next year. This season, 0 shutouts. 6 broke a record, 0. Okay, that tells you of the mental inconsistencies. Again, this happened with Askarov. Where is Yaroslav Askarov? Well, just dominated the AHL, and he sure looks like he's going to be something pretty special still in San Jose, right? Now, is he as talented as Askarov? No, he's not. Nobody is. But he is a very good talent. This is, to me, Jake Ottinger level of talent. But I know some of you are saying, Jake Ottinger, come on. Jake Ottinger was dominant in NCAA in his draft year. Like, this kid's way behind that. Yes, he is. You're right. He is behind that. However, athletically speaking, toolkit wise, everything, he is not behind. That's why we still have him in the top right. It's why we still have him top 3, and he's our number 1 right now. We believe in the kid's upside. We believe that this was an off season or an off year relative to what is coming. We think he's a good-natured kid off ice. I like how he's presented himself. I think he gets it too. So on another podcast I did, I was told that he rightfully identified one of his critical weaknesses, Jérôme. That's a good sign. So he said that he had difficulty on his glove side. And that was absolutely the case. In November, I was on the NHL Network and radio, and I was discussing how his low glove at that time was getting beaten too often. And then by the end of the season, it was actually the high glove to go with the low glove. So glove side was susceptible, and it didn't change. And it's interesting because he's an orthodox, he's a southpaw, which like Michael McIvor, they're both southpaws. So that changes the trajectory of how shooters interpret what they're looking at with him. So the other aspect of this is that he was actually beaten up high over his shoulder girdle, specifically on his glove side. So that whole area was susceptible the entire season. The other factor is he's an incredibly aggressive poke checker. Sound familiar? Askarov, okay? Both of them hyper athletes. They look to take advantage of their extensions and fly out of the net and poke check. It destroyed him. I don't know what was going on. He would constantly overplay with his stick, and he would get beat in the right up to the playoffs. One of the worst playoff goals he let in was a result of his stick position, just constantly trying to overextend with his stick. It's something that absolutely can and will be dialed in or reined in. That said, you look at the rest of his skill set, kind of like Medvedev. Again, the mental inconsistency. He would let in bad goals out of nowhere. You're like, what the heck? You just had like two of the best saves I've seen this month, and now you're throwing away the game over this, right? So there was some of that in him. There's some of that in some of these kids. Medvedev, Frolov, Ravensbergen. They all have some of these mental inconsistencies when it comes to the lower percentage shots getting past them. So that's a huge area that he needs to improve upon. However, his strengths are they're quite high in this draft. He's one of the most fluid goalies in the net. He presents extremely well. He has a very good blocker. His kicking reflexes are spectacular. His extension rates are extremely good. His micro adjustment rates are the second best in this class, lagging only behind Semyon Frolov. He has a phenomenal base to work with. The technical foundation's there. I do think he has some raw instincts to him, which I also prefer because, as you mentioned earlier, Jérôme, like because he came out of nowhere, he had to live off of his raw base for a time there. I think part of the reason that he struggled this year might actually be because for the first time, he had to have some of the technical aspects get caught up, and then I don't think he had a bit of difficulty implementing them over the course of 60 minutes. So he did not have the season we expected, but neither did Askarov. And, talent prevails usually. And that's what we're betting on. Could Andreyanov be better? Absolutely. Could Frolov be better? Absolutely. Could even Pradel or Medvedev or Hood beat him out long term? It's possible. We don't think so, but it's possible. So that's just the nature of the position, right? So when we're recapping this, like the way we look at it is we're probably going to get two of the top 4 to 5 right. Then you get two of the next wave there are 5 to 10 right, and then I'm probably real wrong on two of these goalies somewhere in the C range where maybe it's Meloche, maybe it's Beckman, maybe there's some other goalie that makes it long. Maybe Denault that we talked about being a freak. Maybe he comes together and beats the odds and becomes what Ivan Fedotov was supposed to become, right? So that goes over the whole draft. I'll leave on one note saying, like, for everybody listening, again, we get a lot of parent feedback. If your kid's not on this list, it's nothing against your kid. Nothing personal whatsoever. We just do have our job to do. We try to do it the right way. If you're listening to this, take it as constructive criticism. And I know that our list looks extraordinarily different relative to the public perception of it, or you see these rankings of media rankings. I would love to dive deeper into that, but let's just put it this way. We try to be real scouts. We have a process and we stick to that process. And these are the results, better or for worse. These are the results. So I hope you all enjoyed that. And we have a lot more coming. Jérôme and me are just getting started. We have a ton of content coming out, Jérôme. So maybe break that down for everybody.
And as Brad mentioned, we have more podcasts coming. We're going to break down our top 32 in future episode that will be coming pretty soon because the draft is coming pretty soon too. So we have to get some content up. But yeah, like last year, we did like the breakdown of our top 32. We split this in half because we do talk a lot and we don't want this to be a 7-hour podcast. So and I know people really appreciate the content we did last year in the month of June, just before the draft. So we're going to do that again. And we might have a mock draft with some member of our staff too, that we're going to try to do at some point before the draft. And possibly maybe a mailbag episode also answering some questions. So, and that's about it. So if you've been watching since the first minute, thank you very much. It's been over maybe 2 hours and a half of goalie talk. So for all, if you're here learning about goalie, I think Brad is a really good teacher. He can teach what to look for goalies. But as Brad mentioned, it's never perfect. The perfect does not exist, and scouting goalies is probably the toughest thing to do in scouting. So hopefully you guys appreciate it, and we'll be back soon for more content leading up to the NHL draft. So, and just as a reminder before I go, you still can get our book, the NHL Draft Breakdown, on our website. It's $19.99. You get we wrote over 85,000 word. This profile on 220 players / goalie that will be drafted, or maybe some of them will not be drafted, but you get the point. So you can get that book on hockeyprospect.com. I'll leave the link in the description on YouTube, so it's easier for you guys to find it. So if you want to buy it, we will appreciate it, and I'm sure you will not be disappointed by this book. So that's all for me. Brad, thanks a lot again. I know it's your favorite podcast of the year, and it's also my favorite podcast of the year, so I just asked question and I'll let you go. Thanks again. It's our second year doing a full goalie episode. So, and honestly, like, I was a bit surprised last year how much people actually enjoyed the goalie podcast. We did some good numbers.
Too.
Yeah, we did some good numbers in that
Good.
one. So, so I guess we'll see you guys in the next podcast, next episode, which should be in a few days. So, thanks, guys, and we'll see you around.
Thanks, everybody.